Minions and Associates. If you are already a minion and you would like to type, please hit like. If you would like to become a minion, please hit follow. If you would like to confess, please do so in the comments. And if you would like to share or evangelize, please share. So today we're going to talk about pathological demand avoidance. And let's see here. We're going to start out with page layout. So I get it up here. Gotta go through my list of stuff here.
Are you paying too much for music gear? When you buy used and like new music gear on Reverb, you can save an...
I think I can just...
Let's get to page layout here. And start with her. And we'll see. I have not seen any of these in a while, so this is going to kind of be a little bit of a blind react. Now on this one, I actually have seen the first about 5 minutes, but that's about it. So let's see what
maybe
that page
create
has to say.
YouTube videos on TikTok and just edit as I'm going. The problem is it can only be 10-minute videos, but let's fucking try it. I like this way better. Hey, what's up? What's going on? Welcome. This is my first ever YouTube on TikTok. I'm gonna have to flip this so my face looks like normal in person, or else it's too weird. Do you like my half-painted wall? Me 3. It looks cooler over here, but okay, not that much cooler. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about PDA.
It's so bad. I am like so fixated on this part of the wall that's not completely painted. Like all I could do is focus on that, and it is so terrible.
Autism, because I've been saying it a lot and saying the words out loud a lot and not really saying much about what it is, because I've just gone over it so much. Once I explain this, you guys will understand so much about me and why I am the way that I am. Maybe a lot about yourself too, because bro, a lot of us might fit this profile. I know I do. That's why I'm saying it. PDA, you're thinking public displays of affection? Nay. So it's not a diagnosis, but it's called pathological demand avoidance.
And it is not actually really in the UK. It is recognized as a diagnosis in some places, but for the most part, what they're going to do is they're going to put autism with pathological demand avoidance attributes or something like that, like an add-on kind of thing. And some doctors, the very few handful of doctors here, there might be some in the United States that actually will put that on a diagnosis, but for the most part they won't. Now I was really lucky. I found one psychiatrist that yeah, I know. The way I put that is like, what? So it just kind of depends, but I was really surprised to get a doctor that actually even heard of it. Most psychiatrists haven't even heard of it in the United States. So
called by the community persistent drive for autonomy, because demand avoidance makes it kind of like seem like something that it's not really. Avoiding demands is a core part of it, but that's just what it looks like on the outside. So persistent drive for autonomy. And
to phrase it that way makes it look, or phrase it that way, makes it look like you have an attitude or something, or you're lazy because you're avoiding stuff, you know.
Autonomy, PDA, is a profile of autism. So that means that it's like a autistic people, like some people can be like this kind of autistic. And autistic PDAers have an intense drive to be autonomous, always. I don't just mean intense drive. I mean like it is built into our DNA, and it is actively what drives us in everything we do. When I perceive a demand, I think
most autistics that I know prefer pervasive demand for autonomy, but it's basically everybody's playing with the initials. Everybody knows what we're talking about.
Perceive like someone is trying to control me, or in a weird way, I'm not autonomous. I'm not 100% making my own decision. If it's not fair, if it just like it doesn't make sense because it's not fair. My nervous system goes into fight, flight, freeze, the same as it would if I were fighting a tiger in front of me. What that means is in those cases, when I lose control or have to give into a demand, which a lot can be a demand, My nerve.
Now when she's talking about this tiger, like if there's a tiger in front of me, um, this is for anything and everything. It could be for something you want. Maybe you want to go see a movie or something, and so it's time to go. Now all of a sudden, that demand to go to do something even that you want to do becomes a real problem, and actually, it can become paralyzing to where you can't actually even move.
Nervous system works into keeping me safe, and so I lose access to my thinking brain and my frontal lobe, and I go into my fight, flight, freeze, survival monkey brain. And if I'm past a certain threshold, then I will melt down or shut down. Some PDAers are more internal with their reactions and how they handle control and demands, and some are more external. It's usually easier to spot with a PDAer who is more external because they're more likely to say no when they have a demand, or scream and punch or bite you, or just like growl and run away. Sometimes the nervous system says fight, we're not doing it. Sometimes the nervous system says flight, run away, or distract them, or get onto a different topic, or figure out a way around it, cancel the plans, figure it out, you're not doing it. Or also freeze, bring it all into your head.
And this like I have a visceral, I can feel the adrenaline rush if the phone rings, or if I can hear that I've got a text message, or the door, I hear somebody walking down the hall, or anything. Anything can trigger it, and it can be something that's very, very minor. I can hear my wife's voice, and the fight for life, fight or flight response can be activated.
Associating, not being able to do anything or go anywhere. And I think this is where I fall in a lot, and when I do, I become just autistically inert. Now, a lot of times when I talk about PDA, people are like, that sounds like it could be a lot of other things. Sounds like oppositional defiant disorder. Well, it's not. That sounds like, just being a human person. Well, it's not. That sounds like you just like are normal. No one likes being told what to do. Well, it's not like that. Personally, it's fucked. I'm only just now learning about PDA and me and how it impacts and affects me today, but it impacted me and affected me since I was little, just in different ways. I always say it was so hard to be a kid, and I always felt like one of the reasons why it was so hard is because I knew nothing and could not make any decisions, and I had to trust the people around me to make the decisions.
And people making decisions for me drives me insane. And it can be it can be any decision. It drives me insane when somebody else is making it
for me, and I didn't trust them. So I had to be controlled. I couldn't be autonomous. I had no choice, and that sucked. As soon as I could speak, I was trying to pick my own outfits, which isn't fun. I don't want to do that. I was very bossy, and I would tell my parents that they were playing with, by parents I mean my mom, maybe 1 or 2 times. And then I was like, you're playing wrong. She's like, okay, I'm not playing with you then. Fuck off. Pro tip, please play with your PDA child. Play is actually like a very important thing to do with your child, with your PDA child. For some context and some clarity, let's go over what some demands are or can look like. They're going to change and vary person to person, and also mindset to mindset. Anything that is not spontaneous right now, me deciding it in the moment, anything that is pre-planned feels like I have to do it, which feels like a demand and feels like not autonomy. Anything that I have to do is a demand. Or anything that I think anyone is trying to make it so I try to feel like I have to do it, demand. My parents telling me go brush.
So that means any kind of influence, anytime we have contact with another person, there's always some kind of influence. Maybe they just like your presence and they want to hang out. So they're trying to influence you to hang out. That's a demand. They're demanding your presence. And it may not necessarily be in what we perceive by the colloquial sense of the word, demanding, like they're like, well, we have to see you now. No, it'd be like, hey, what's up? As soon as they say what's up and we know that the direction that they want to go is to hang out, maybe we even want to hang out with them. But the fact that now that there's that pressure there, it makes it very difficult to hang out. And it can be that weird
Brush your teeth, demand. Even when my mom was like, hey, how was school? Going to school was a demand. Going to dance afterwards. I quit like every single activity that I did, but I wanted to do them so bad. It's just that I couldn't when I got there or before going. Today that looks like working, which is great, because just like work and capitalism in general does not feel autonomous. When I've gotten really depressed and low, living can feel like a demand. Eating, showering, vacuuming, doing laundry. I mean, that kind of does in the day-to-day, but there's some times when that just felt like so fucking rude, you know, that I'm like, how dare I? Like, who's making me do this right now? That I don't want to do any of this stuff.
And this can be, like I said, this can be people asking you to do things that you want to do, or maybe not even asking you to do what you want to do. It can just be whatever you have to do, brushing your teeth, whatever, like she said, that can trigger it.
But even though rationally I do, I know the consequences. I don't want the consequences. I love having a clean house. I love being clean. I know all of these things. Sleeping, love sleeping. I was an insomniac since I was a little kid because sleep is a demand. Text message is a demand. Poems, quotes used to be a big demand for me. Signs, anyone advertising, any advertisement. PDA people are also usually really good at.
Most signs, why is a sign there? It's to tell you to do something. I may be telling you to do something that's important, but, and it may be something telling you to do something that's helpful, but nonetheless, it is still a demand. It is still someone trying to influence you to do something.
Sniffing out when someone's trying to sell you something, or when there's an ulterior motive, or when someone's trying to make you feel a way. They're trying to influence you in a way that makes it so you're being controlled. Someone's trying to control you in a way, manipulate you in a way, not autonomous. And I can smell that bullshit from a mile away. Not doing it. So what are some ways to help PDA? Obviously, it's going to be very, very different for everybody. And I recommend that if this is you or if this is your loved one, don't listen to anybody specifically. Listen, take a listen to everybody, and then focus on your kid or on yourself, on your person, and see the patterns. Write them down, see the patterns of what's going on, and maybe you can start to identify the triggers. Questions, suggestions can be a trigger. So even initiating something with a PDAer may be seen as a demand. There are a lot of just language shifts that you can use. So instead of like asking a question, for example, just like using statements of things that are real and exist, and then letting that PDAer go from there and make their own choices. So instead of like, what do you want to eat for dinner? Be like, we have peas and we have carrots. Whenever I babysat, I would never ask the kids like, do you want milk? I know you don't want milk. I'd be like, are we drinking milk from the red cup or the blue cup today? And they're like, the blue one. That's just because that's how my brain works, and so that's how I work. I would recommend living as low demand of a lifestyle as possible. So what that looks like is not having any obligations if you can help it. Or when you do set those obligations, setting that boundary to know like, I may cancel this and I may change this. As a dance teacher of all ages, there are a lot of neurodivergent kids in dance, and there are PDAers, and dance is a very triggering thing for a PDAer. It was for me when I was little. I quit dance because it's a demand. It's something you have to do, and even though these kids love it, I know they do, it's stressful. I try to offer my classes to those kids. I'm like, it's optional. You don't have to do it. You don't have to be here. This is just a thing that you can do. I'm here regardless. You can just come have a seat, or you don't have to come to class sometimes. Parents, of course, would love their kid to come to class all the time, but if your kid's coming to class and just crying the whole time, you're losing your money anyway. Might as well put your money into it and say, like, this is now an accommodation for my child's nervous system, and we can go when they decide to. A lot of PDA kids require a lot of care and attention and a stable nervous system. And so if they're freaking out and yelling at you, then you are probably their...
And that's why it is sometimes conflated with what do they call it? Defiance disorder. I want to say occupational, but it's not occupational. Oppositional defiance disorder, I think is what they call it. But that has different causes, and it's a different thing. That is actually a rebellious thing. This has nothing to do with rebellion or not wanting to do with something or anything like that. This is something that is neurological that we can't control. Now, um, oppositional defiant disorder isn't on the spectrum also, but like I said, it is a different thing and it has different causes.
Your safe nervous system. So good job. Are any of you guys PDA and do you already know it? If so, let me know what is demanding to you. Like something else that's a demand. I'll tell you something else. Menus. I cannot read menus. I get weird about menus. And I'm hyper.
My wife actually does all the ordering for me in restaurants. I will talk to her, but then when the waiter or waitress or whatever comes up, she actually does the ordering for a couple of reasons. One, they tend to ask too many questions, and it shuts me down. Like if you order a salad, they may ask you. They may have 3 or 4 different salads, and then they may have 3 or 4 different dressings or whatever. And it just it's too much for me. And I also have a audio processing disorder that makes it a little bit difficult for me to hear in restaurants anyway. So my wife basically accommodates me in that way, and she actually orders for me because of that.
Dyslexic. I look at menus and I'm like, ugh! Anyway, cool. Thanks for being here. I'll talk more about some PDA things later, but I can't wait to hear from you guys and see what you think and if you guys have any prior knowledge and or experience, because I don't.
Recordings just got better.
Okay, so
Hey, it's Dana from
we'll go on to this next one. This next one is I am
Hey,
mind
my
blind.
name's Amanda.
I have not seen this one. Let's see what she has to say.
This is a vlog where I'm processing my late autism and ADHD diagnosis. I also have full and multisensory aphantasia and a memory disorder called SDAM, which stands for severely deficient autobiographical memory. And I talk about all of these on this channel. So today, PDA has been.
Are we having a commercial already? Are we just losing connection? Okay, we're losing connection. So we'll say bye-bye to Instagram, I guess. All right, let's try this again.
At the forefront. So if anyone doesn't know, no, it's not. Now I forgot what PDA normally stands for. Public display of affection. It is not public display of affection. In the autism community, PDA is pathological demand avoidance, and it is a profile of autism. As far as I am aware, it is you have to be autistic to have PDA. I have heard some people.
There's a little bit of debate on that, and I am of the understanding that not only do you have to be autistic, but you have to be autistic ADHD to be PDA. But there are going to be some people that argue with that. But for the most part, most people, if you're autistic, or if you're PDA, you're autistic, is what it boils down to.
People say that they are ADHD only and also feel like they have PDA. I am not a medical professional, but this is just what I've read. I do know that there is a very high comorbidity rate of ADHD and autism. And a lot of people, if they were diagnosed with ADHD before, I think 2013, at that time, practitioners were only allowed to diagnose one or the other, not both. And so a lot of doctors would diagnose ADHD and not even mention autism because you can medicate ADHD.
And also, yes, you can medicate ADHD so you can treat the ADHD, and then also to avoid the stigma of autism.
You can't medicate autism. There's a lot of psychologists that think if you've made it to adulthood and you're autistic, then you just don't even need to know about it
or you're not autistic.
Because you're fine.
Most doctors don't even take autism into consideration. Very few doctors actually take autism into consideration when it comes uh, 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 to adults.
And what they are now learning is that most of us who have been undiagnosed eventually hit burnout because trying to appear neurotypical is not good for our brains. It causes our cortisol levels to be at a constant high level, which just basically science is not good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my kids needed help, so I had to pause the video there for a minute. But basically, I was saying like having high levels of cortisol, it stresses out your nervous system, it rewires your brain, it causes CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder. And that's what a lot of us late diagnosed autistic people are dealing with now is recovery from burnout. So getting a late diagnosis is vital so that you can know how to accommodate yourself and take care of your nervous system. But speaking of the nervous system, the pathological demand avoidance profile of autism is a nervous system trigger. And basically, what happens is that your nervous system, the amygdala in your brain, the part that doesn't understand you're not actually in danger, that there's not actually a lion in the room, it sees a picture of a lion.
As I say, the autism doesn't care. A lot of times, I can know that um, the situation is perfectly okay intellectually, and still have that flight response. And I mean, I constantly have that flight response. Medication can help it to an extent, which is good, but the autism, the flight response does not care about what the actual situation is, whether it's rational or irrational, whether it's a threat or not a threat. You still have that same defense mechanism. That same, you want to defend yourself or run.
And it tells you that there's a real lion in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So it activates your fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response. And it can be from, it's a perceived demand from your brain. And it can be from an external source or even internal. Mm-hmm. That's the part that drives me crazy, because it's like I can want to do something, but because my brain perceives it as a demand, it wants to protect myself from the demand. The other affirming way that people in the autism community want to change PDA is to persistent drive for autonomy, because the demand.
It sounded like it cut out there. Persistent drive for autonomy is something that a lot of the people in the PDA community call it, and I think that's what we would prefer to call it. And hopefully, it can be the name can change rather than the pathological demand avoidance, because it literally pathologizes it, and it makes it sound like you have, like the person is the problem, or that we are some kind of psychopath or something like that. A lot of the language for mental health language is extremely hurtful to those that they're trying to treat.
And it's like it's a demand against our autonomy, like who we think we are or how we want to be in the world. I'm not describing that exactly right, but so even if it's something that I want to do, if you have PDA profile of autism, your brain actively works against you. And one example I can give, behind my yellow bee over there is Devin Price's book, Unmasking Autism. I got partway through it. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. But all of a sudden, I couldn't read it anymore. It felt like a demand to read this book. And even though I want to read it, what will happen is my brain is working against me, I will read a sentence or a paragraph, and then I'm like, wait, what did I read? I'm not actually retaining the information. My brain isn't letting me. And this is important because if you have autistic children with pathological demand avoidance profile in school, it can be very difficult because when a teacher assigns something, then it the child can be activated, and it's extremely
Yeah, the fact that that they give a homework assignment may make it to where that person with PDA may not be able to complete the assignment just because it's due the next day.
difficult for them to overcome this nervous system response of fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. So, like in the reading the book example, what would that be? It's
My name is Daniel Burrow. I am a
Get rid of this commercial stuff.
freeze. Maybe it's like a freeze response. It's like I'm reading the words, but I'm not actually taking anything in. Um, and so for me, when I was a kid, my autistic math.
All right. Well, okay. So I'm getting a little. Okay. So hopefully, I don't lose connection here. I certainly will try my best not to.
Pretty much almost always overrode my PDA profile of autism. And that showed up in the fact that, like, part of my mask, and I've talked about it before, is like running neurotypical .exe, like a code through my brain. And one of those things is always be a good little girl. And so my mask.
I there's nothing in my mind about PDA that makes me want to behave or be a good boy at all. I don't care. I just do not care whatsoever.
The autistic mask is also another survival technique for your brain creates for itself. And so the always be a good girl would often override my own PDA response. So even if I didn't want to do something, even if it felt too hard or too big or too scary, too much like a demand on my system, because I had to be a good girl and do what I was told, I would push through that demand. Then as I got older and I actually did have a little bit of autonomy on myself, now the PDA profile is even coming up more and more for me, especially as I'm unmasking and not always trying to be a little good girl. But there were times in school where the PDA would activate and I would say no. Like a teacher would give an assignment and I would just flat out say no. And I would get a 0 on that grade. And the teacher would be like, well, I'm gonna have to call your parents. And
then they're like, why are you copping such an attitude and all this and saying that she's being a horrible person when she literally wasn't able to do it because of the PDA and because of the fight or flight or freeze. So it can be extremely difficult and look like this kid is actively being defiant when that's literally not the root of the problem.
Luckily, my mom always supported me, and I was always passing my classes because that's one thing that I would do. I would calculate out what my grade would be, even if I got a 0 on that assignment, and if I was still passing, and I knew like that assignment was just something that I could not do, then I just wouldn't do it. And the adults in my life would be so befuddled because they were like, Amanda's always such a good little girl. I don't understand why she's being stubborn with this. And that's what he said. But now looking back, I know it was the pathological demand avoidance profile of autism.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So today, like bringing it all back to today, my YouTube channel, oh my gosh, I love this YouTube channel. It has been so helpful for me to be able to vlog my experience. I started.
Okay, let's keep on talking about
more
PDA.
common in boys, but not always. And so I have found that my channel has resonated with a lot of you, and that fills me.
Oh, let's talk about
This one's,
PDA.
Somewhat rambling.
And now you're getting a rambly video as you're talking about
Schedule.
rambly
So
videos.
that's why that one lasted longer. And that one ended for other burnout reasons. But that's, if I had known I was autistic, and then you could have a job where one of my accommodations would have to be a job that would allow for extreme flexibility in scheduling. Like, I'll get my job done as long as I'm in control of my schedule. And a lot of places.
And see, what she said is so, so important there. She said she can do it as long as she's in control of the situation. Now, when I was in grade school, they would put me in the special kid class because I wasn't doing well. And then, because they would put me in the special kid class, there weren't other kids in there, or very few. And so I would get like my entire quarter's work done in a week and a half or maybe two. And I mean, the entire everything. And so they'd be like, oh, well, he's just not trying. And they put me back in the regular class, and I would fail because I couldn't do anything anymore. And so it went round and round until they finally just gave up, and they wouldn't put me in special kid class anymore. Which, if they would have just left me in there and left me alone, then I could have, progressed many grades very, very quickly and gone to college if I would have had the support I needed. But instead, they treated me like a disciplinary problem and sacrificed my education because it pissed them off that I was a disciplinary problem. They wanted to address that discipline, not educate me, which is what they were supposed to be doing. If they would have focused on my education and allowing me to educate myself in my way, in which worked for me, like I said, I could have probably been in college by the time I was in junior high. But that's not what happened.
Can't work with that. I went to go get my teaching certificate after college. I went to college as an architect major, but after college, I love teaching. That's why I homeschooled my kids. But one reason I homeschooled my kids, another one was to keep autonomy of my schedule, because I didn't want my schedule to be run around my kids' public school system.
Mm-hmm.
And this was all before diagnosis. It was just inherent. The thought.
She had the natural instinct because she knew who she was. And the thing is this is a very mature kind of thinking here that she had, because, like I said, she knew herself. She didn't know that she was autistic, but she knew how her brain worked. And that goes because, I mean, she's not 22 years old, or 21 years old. She's a little bit older than 21. And the older that you get, the more experience you have, the better that you can deal with that. But now the thing is when you understand that you're a PDA, pathological demand avoidant, or as I prefer basic drive for autonomy, then it makes a lot of difference, and you can take a lot more control and be much more successful. But you have to know what's going on. And the thing is usually it's framed into you're just a horrible person, just trying to act out, or just trying to not do your work or whatever.
Get up and take my kids to school every day. I had many reasons for homeschooling. That was just one of them. Anyway, going with that guy, my brain. I'm so tangents are so frustrating.
Hi, we're Visible, the wireless company that makes things visible. With us, what you see is what you get.
So yeah, I went to go get my teaching certificate, and that's actually, as I was finishing up my teaching certificate, is where I got hired on as a graphic artist. So I never actually did go apply at schools, but it wouldn't have worked. Oh my gosh, I would not have been able to work in a school system because the rigid control over schedules and all the bureaucracy and the hierarchies in schools. A school would be, and the sensory experience, like being a teacher, unless you're a different type of autistic person than me, and there's a huge That's why it's a spectrum. So maybe it would be a good fit for some teachers, but definitely not my flavor of autism. It would have been a bad thing. I'm glad I never went down that route in actuality. Whew. Shudder. And kudos to all our teachers out there. Like, y'all do an amazing service to our youth. And y'all do not get enough credit or all of that. But anyway, whew. I just saw the clock and it's already at 18 minutes. It's like once I get talking, I can just keep talking. Anyway,
that comes with the autism.
So you can overcome, or at least I have found that I can overcome pathological demand avoidance, but because it's a perceived demand, but it takes a lot of mental work to get there. It takes one recognizing that there isn't an actual demand, or that I can find choice in the matter. So like if it had to do with working, I could be like, okay, I can go to work because I'm choosing to go to work, or I can quit my job. That's my choice. I do have that as a choice. And maybe I can go find another job somewhere else. And then between those two choices, I could be like, I really don't want to have to go find another job. This job's looking a lot better. So I'm going to choose to stay at my current job. But whenever you have somebody with PDA, if it's yourself or if you're working with another PDA teen or child, giving them choice over their autonomy as much as possible really helps regulate the brain and feel less trapped, feel like the demand can go away. And that you reminder that in almost anything that we do in life, there is
whether or not it matters. If we feel that we have control, we can function. If we don't feel, if and in fact, if we rationally know that we're in control, but the PDA, our flight response is sent off, it doesn't matter. As I say, the autism doesn't care. The PDA does not care about the reasonableness of the situation or the rationality of the situation. When it is triggered, it wants you to go, and that's the end of the story. And real life does not matter. And that's one of the reasons why my son took his life, because the alexithymia took over and was telling him that he was worthless and that he shouldn't be living, and etc. And it set off his empathy to the point where he took his own life.
A choice. You may not like the other choice, but it is often a choice. I mean, paying taxes is not a choice, but you could choose to not pay your taxes and go to jail. You probably don't want that choice. But
and the thing is it's not really necessarily a choice, and which makes it so hard. I wish it was a choice. You wish it was. You wish you could decide.
Okay, I'm going to do that choice. So that just helps me with PDA, is like when I'm feeling like there's a demand. So like today, it's like I want to make a video. Like I really want to make a video. And right now it's almost 7 o'clock. This is the latest I've ever filmed a video. Because I normally like to do them in the morning or early afternoon, but I was struggling that much. And no, I don't have to put out a video. Like I specifically don't have a schedule, because that would, again, put another layer of feeling like demand. Like a lot of YouTubers have, I release videos on Tuesdays and Saturdays or something. I purposely don't do that, because then it would be feeling too much like a demand for myself. But I really wanted to do a video today. I had all afternoon to do it, and I struggled so hard. And I had to restart the video so many times. And then I ended up refilming the video, because I think I was still so dysregulated that first time that I pulled it up and I was starting to edit it. And I was just like, no, sometimes it's worth redoing. And so that's what I did. And I hope that this video does provide some insight and value.
Okay, it looks like
to
she's closing
you.
it up, and unfortunately,
completing the Champions Finals.
Effort.
I do it too, but she got a little bit rambly on that one. I think she realized it.
Feel to me that.
So let's take a look here, and this is I'm autistic. Now what? I forget what this lady's name is.
Like danger, like warning. I fit a profile of autism called Pathological Demand Avoidance. I have a whole video talking about it here. But when you hear the name Pathological Demand Avoidance, what does it make you think of? One of the reasons why I hate that name so much is because I feel like it describes what PDA might look like on the outside for somebody who has a very overt presentation of PDA, who externalizes their PDA a lot. It's all about how somebody might behave. It's not about the internal experience of PDAs. When you hear pathological demand avoidance, you might imagine somebody flipping over tables because they've been told to do something that they don't want to do. You might think of positional defiance disorder, which is a common misdiagnosis for PDA, particularly with the word pathological in there. It doesn't really sound like someone you'd want to be around all that much, and it doesn't sound like somebody that you'd have.
Definitely sounds like somebody I'd want to avoid. So yeah, I would want to avoid me.
Very much sympathy for or want to feel much kindness towards. It doesn't imply anything about the root cause of PDA, which is anxiety. I feel like in the 1980s, when the psychologist Elizabeth Newson came up with the term PDA, she must have been in a really bad mood. There must have been one kind of client or patient or...
Oh, it's just the way that they... Medically, it was very faddish to call any medical condition by the very worst thing that anyone could come up with. The worse you could make it sound, the better it seemed to be. They just love that stuff. And it still happens to this day.
Who really drove her crazy that day. Without her, the concept of PDA being a profile of autism wouldn't even exist. So I am very...
Technically, it is pathological, but when we think of pathological, the word pathological, the way it's been used and so forth, being related to not actual schizophrenia, but like super scary Hollywood schizophrenia and stuff like that, they're pathological. Yeah, it really has done us a bit disservice.
Grateful to her, but it's a different time now. Maybe we can move forwards. Today I'm going to talk about what does PDA feel like from the inside. I'm also going to draw on the experience of a few other PDAs as well. What does PDA feel like then? Well, number one, I did have a comment on a previous video about how can you tell if you have the PDA profile of autism or if you're just dealing with executive dysfunctions, which is kind of like your ability to plan, organize, and then see things through and execute tasks. And I'd say PDA does come with a significant amount of executive function difficulties, but I think you can separate it from non-PDA executive dysfunction by asking yourself how certain situations would make you feel. If somebody needed to get past you in a supermarket and said to you, "Can I just squeeze past you there, love? Would that be okay?" How would that make you feel? If somebody noticed you had something in your teeth and said, "Oh, you've got something in your teeth there, just get that out," how would you?
Just last night, I went to a bar. It's now a VFW, and I've gone there. I'm 53. I've gone there since I was about 22, and I went in there. We were having I'm a member of the Marine Corps League. My wife is also a member of the Marine Corps League. She's the commandant, and so I was there in this building with a bunch of people that I know. Well, it just so happened that there happened to be a new cook there, that I didn't know, or at least I'd never seen him before. And he was like, "Hey, bud," it kind of raises his voice really loud, and I'm about 30 feet away, I don't know. And he raises his voice so that I can hear him. He's like, "Hey, you want anything?" And immediately I shut down. I couldn't even talk to him, and I turned around and walked away from him. Like, I was really rude to this guy because it was a new person in that situation that I wasn't expecting to be there. So after I realized what happened and everything, And after a while, after I kind of just started listening, getting used to him and everything, then I went up to him and ordered, and I kind of apologized. I said, "Look, I'm autistic, and that set off my flight response there because I didn't expect you to be there." And he was so cool, and he recognized that. And after that, he kind of got to be my buddy, so he's good to go. But that initial, just him saying hello, wanting to give me a beer in a bar, set off my flight response, and I couldn't even talk to the guy.
You feel if your partner who you love and feel like you would die for asks you to pass them their drink, which is within reaching distance of you, how did those scenarios make you feel? For me, those things feel irritating is probably the word that I would have used in the past. They make me feel like a kind of prickling under my skin. It's a similar feeling to if someone started blasting a lawnmower outside out of nowhere. If you're somebody who identifies with misophonia, so you feel anger or irritation or anxiety, just negative emotions when you hear certain sounds, particularly kind of like mouth sounds like yawning and swallowing, humming and whistling and things like that as well. If those get under your skin, it's a very similar feeling. People asking me to do things, no matter how simple they are, how easy they would be for me to carry out, no matter how much, if I had made the decision to do it myself, I would actually want to help them, no matter how illogical it is, it still makes me feel dysregulated. And I always just thought I must be kind of a bad-mooded person because it feels like irritation. But I think we overlook how connected anger, rage, irritation are to anxiety. Your body is switching over into fight mode in that state. Your body thinks it's in danger. Unfortunately, sometimes that danger is someone telling you to pick a bit of spinach out of
And as I was saying, your body thinks that you're gonna die. You may know that everything's okay, but that doesn't matter. The autism doesn't care.
your teeth. Number 2, PDA.
And neither do the commercials that I can't stand. Over and over and over all the time.
Can feel like depression. From a very young age, I would say about 7 years old, I would have probably used the word depressed to describe myself, and other people around me would sometimes have used that word. But I could usually get out of bed even though it felt hard. So I thought I'm probably just mildly depressed. And then as I got older, I discovered the word dysthymia, which is like chronic, long-lasting, low-level depression. And if you look at the symptoms of that, you can see how a neurodivergent person might, particularly a neurodivergent person who's putting themselves in situations that are not ideal for them on a daily basis, might feel like this fit for them. I kind of just read the symptoms at the time and thought, yeah, that's probably me, and then just shrugged and moved on. And thanks to this incredible video by Purple Ella, I've realized that feeling, the feelings I was having then were actually anxiety. And it's so funny because we use the word anxiety so much on a daily basis. We talk about anxiety disorders maybe more than any other sort of mental health issue, but I don't know how many of us actually realize what anxiety is and what it actually feels like, particularly those of us who live with it almost constantly, because that's just your normal then. And PDAs are more likely to experience anxiety than other autistic people, which is super fun. You could rename PDA to extreme demand anxiety. I think that would make a lot of sense because sometimes we don't avoid the demands. When we avoid the demands,
And I think that would be completely appropriate to call it extreme demand anxiety.
the feeling on the inside is externalized more and might become more obvious to somebody trying to diagnose you. But sometimes demands make us feel awful and take a toll on our mental health, but we do them anyway because we feel like we have no choice. And often there isn't a choice. If you want to survive, you have to put food in your body no matter how much you don't want to, you know? I was a very happy baby and I don't remember ever feeling too many unpleasant emotions before I started school. And I think the reason why I had these dysthymia-like symptoms was school. School is very demanding. It requires you to be somewhere from this time to this time and have your entire day dictated by somebody else. And that obviously isn't great for a PDA, no matter how well behaved they might be at school. I didn't get chosen for that thing, but I knew I wouldn't because everyone at school thinks I'm shy. I do act quite shy. Other people might see me as quiet, and there is actually a little difference. I pull myself in so that I do not get hurt in this vicious jungle called school. And I think it just took a toll on me. I spent a lot of my time at school in a kind of shut down state where I was.
I really wonder if she had any idea she was autistic when she made that video.
very expressive. I didn't talk very much. I shrunk into myself and was very meek and passive and kind of just let the day wash over me and internalized any negative feelings that I felt. I would have imagined anxiety as like fireworks in your belly, you know, like I wouldn't have thought of anxiety as feeling heavy, feeling slow, feeling like you carry a little rain cloud around with you all the time, and like life has kind of been drained of color, feeling a sense of doom. Number 3, Rico PDA, who has another great YouTube channel and also a Facebook page, describes PDA as feeling like you are facing your phobias every day. And if you've lived with PDA your whole life, which if you're a PDA...
I am not familiar with that, Rico's PDA, but that's something I'm definitely going to check out.
You have. You might not recognize this straight away because you're just used to kind of going about your day. For me, if I think about it, yeah, each task that I do in the day feels like something that I have to overcome. Getting out of bed is a huge obstacle that I have to get over. It's like you have to take a deep breath and then brace yourself and go, whew, and push yourself into doing it. It can feel like ripping a plaster off. And that's kind of how you imagine, you know, facing a phobia. Like, this feels awful to me, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to overcome, and I'm going to rise above this. Except from you having to do this and find this energy reserve inside yourself to do this, about all of the steps you have to do in the morning to get out of the door. You break them down into their tiny steps, which we do mentally. PDAs often like to list every single thing that they have to do and break things into tiny fragments because they all feel like mountains we have to climb. I hate getting ready. I'm often quite irritable in the morning. Fucking hate doing my eyebrows so much because I feel like I wake up with weight pressing on my chest, and that weight is all of the things I am yet to do. And I feel like in the evening time I am definitely lighter. I wouldn't say light, but I feel lighter because I have battled my way through the day and I have overcome all of the obstacles between me and feeling okay, which are all the things that are required of me. Number 4, PDA can sometimes feel like relief. Beautiful, peaceful, big sigh, big satisfying sigh, relief when we manage to unload a task. It's kind of ironic, but PDAs can be quite demanding of other people in their life. There are times where
I will tell you right now, I feel so much pressure just to finish this video. I can turn it off at any point in time. I can stop, but I'm actually getting sick from having to finish doing this. And I'm planning on doing this for a couple more hours or whatever. But the thing is, and this is something I want to do, but now I have put a demand on myself to sit here and finish this. And then I got some things I want to do afterwards. But now I feel sick to the stomach because I put that demand on myself. So it does not make any sense sometimes.
Ask my husband to do something for me that I am completely capable of doing. And I've noticed this about myself and always found it very confusing. Why on earth do I ask my husband to get me my computer charger when it would involve him moving to a different room? Why do I think that it's okay for me to ask that of somebody else? And I have heard some PDAs say they hate asking things of anybody else because they empathize and know what it feels like for them.
I would never ever be able to ask anyone else for something simple like that. I just don't do it. And like my wife, she'll ask me to do things, and it's because I think she likes to feel taken care of. And I like to take care of her. I like to give her that feeling because she takes care of me constantly. And so her asking those little things at the end of the day when she's done with things, maybe she needs some water and she's lying down in bed watching TV. Maybe she wants some water. And I have absolutely, in fact, I want to do those things. And help her with these things, and I'll go in there and ask her if she wants something. But the thing is on the other side, and she takes care of me a million times. For every time I get her a glass of water or whatever else, she's done a million things that are way more significant. So that's not understandable, and that's not necessarily that a hard demand. But it's still, even in itself, a demand. Even if I want to go do something for her like that, it can be difficult for me. And it's just something that I just push myself through.
But for me, I do sometimes ask people for things. It's just such a strong, pleasant feeling of relief to have somebody do something for me, even when it's something I'm capable of doing, that I kind of crave that feeling of being supported. Oh, look, it's not just me against life, me fighting it. There are other people who are going to fight this danger with me, and I am safe. There's no better feeling than when somebody takes something out of our hands and says, I'll do that for you, or I'll help you with that. We can do it together. That feels like everything is going to be okay. So Some PDAers may disagree, and it might feel like an imposition sometimes. Other ways that you can unlearn tasks sometimes are dropping out. It can feel like the most incredible relief to just drop something and just be like, I'm not doing this anymore. So I should really be doing my A-levels, but I dropped out of college when I was in my AS year, right before the exams. I was doing really well, getting all A's, going on to get A stars and A2, and then just dropped out. My pattern in life has been often...
And that kind of thing with college or whatever sounds very, very common for PDA autistics. In fact, it's amazing how many of us autistics have actually gone to college but not finished it. I think of those of us that have gone to college, probably 80% of us didn't finish. I didn't finish my nursing degree.
Try very hard at something, be at the top of doing something because I put so much pressure on myself and worked so hard to do it, and then get to breaking point and then turn around and walk away like it's nothing. And when you do drop things, it can feel like you're just opening your arms wide in a field in the middle of nowhere, spinning around, just freedom. But then sometimes you kind of wake up to the reality that now, okay, I've left that, and now what am I supposed to do? And then that can make you feel kind of out of control, and you can start spiraling in a different direction. So it's not always gonna solve everything. I also get the feeling of relief from actually doing tasks and feeling like I've completed them, and I think there have been some parts of my life where I've been kind of addicted to that feeling, that tiny little like, whew, deep breath sense, like, okay, maybe everything's gonna be all right, and then it's like, oh, get back on with the next thing quick. And it feels like you're running away from something. And PDA children can be quite passive in early childhood. I certainly was. I let my mom do a lot of things for me, and I think that's why I was happier before I started school, because I felt like I was very...
And I have a very hard time with anybody doing things for me. I like to do most of everything for myself. It's just... And you know, when you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. But both can be PDA.
Very supported and very safe at home. But strangely, PDAs tend to grow up to be quite independent people because we crave freedom. We crave doing things our own way. I moved out when I was 19, and I love running my own business, which might seem ironic because it sounds like a very high pressure, demanding thing to do, and certainly some aspects of it. I'm
just gonna laugh at her husband here. Look at her husband. Our husband's sitting there. That is so neurodivergent. I've been sitting here on and off. I've been turning on and off my my overlay here because I've been literally getting up and rearranging my body here and sitting cross-legged and so forth. I've been really restless here. Trying to just find a way to sit that's comfortable. That's a very neurodivergent thing. And I'm almost positive her husband's neurodivergent, but I just think that's cute and hilarious.
Sounds like a very high pressure, demanding thing to do, and certainly some aspects of it can be difficult to deal with, but I just love the freedom. Where's my piece of paper that told me what the hell I'm doing? There it is. What's that? Oh, that's a tax receipt. Let's go with tax receipt. I can do whatever I want. Why is that line gonna get stuck in my head? Right, bye. I really liked this quote from Rico PDA about independence.
This is the thinnest armor ever.
All right. There we go.
Independent person. I've had to manage my own life from a young age. I don't like people helping me, but at the same time, I can expect people to do things for me, such as the way of PDA. So yeah, there are a lot of contradictions in PDA. The more you get to know your PDA person, the more you'll understand them. Number 5, at its worst, PDA can feel like spiraling out of control, like the earth is tilting on its axis and like things are never gonna be okay again. But our survival response really likes to be triggered. It's very eager and very keen.
And that's my son had alexithymia, and he experienced this. And at 21, he took his own life. So this is very, very serious.
So it doesn't take a lot for us to feel like we're under threat. In terms of fight, PDA can feel like pure anger, pure rage. You may have grown up thinking of yourself as somebody who has anger issues, which is not a great feeling. And this rage can completely suspend your logic. You can become very impulsive and just act.
And can get us in a lot of trouble. Not only with the people that love us, but with the law.
on adrenaline
Man,
and
that has
not even
happened
be
with
able
me.
to think straight. It feels like the world is ending. Like nothing is ever going to be okay again. And as a result, it can just feel like the consequences don't matter anymore because everything is over. It's incredibly frustrating then when you come back from that state, and obviously can be really upsetting for you and for the people around you as well, and can have some pretty negative consequences. But I have found myself that understanding that anger is actually anxiety. It's a fight-threat response. My body feels like it's in danger, can be helpful. If you can restore a sense of safety for a PDA in a fight response, you may be able to bring them back down to earth though. It may just take time. Once that kind of adrenaline response has been set off, it can take a while to come down from it, and it can be quite easy to find yourself back in that response again because that adrenaline's already there in your system. It's much easier for that state to be triggered again. So someone with PDA might apologize, and it might all seem like it's okay, and as the PDA you may really believe that you're okay, but then you find yourself being triggered by one little small thing again, or like feeling self-hatred could trigger it because you feel like you messed up so much earlier. You may then actually end up messing up again because now you have anger at yourself and you feel like you're out of control and you can't control your own behavior, and that is very scary. I've dealt a lot with the flight response. I can think of many stories from my life where switch is just flicked in my brain and I've gone from being fine to being completely unable to cope and feeling like I need to run away. I ran away from an English literature exam once. I really struggle with that acute pressure of being in an exam situation. My mum was dropping me off for the English exam and I was just in such a panic that I grabbed my stuff and just got out the car and started running in the opposite way, and she had to kind of talk me down and say, Meg, you won't be able to live with yourself if you run away from doing this. And in my head I was scared of myself. I was like, am I really gonna run away from an exam? Would I do that? Is that
And you can know, you can absolutely know that what you're doing is, quote, wrong, or you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, but the autism doesn't care. The PDA doesn't care. That flight response is activated no matter what. Imagine if something scares you, there's a loud bang or something in your house, and you feel that adrenaline rush. You can't just will that adrenaline rush to have turned off once it's already on. It's on. And with us, we just can't turn it back off. Even when we realize that it was a book that fell on the floor, it's okay. It does not matter. It's that flight response has been activated and you can't help it. That's where the pathological, that's why that word pathological is thrown in there, because it's a response that you cannot help.
Something that I'm capable of, and it really felt like I was. And then I did actually go into the exam. I got a question that I was actually super confident on answering, and I'm not sure if maybe that contributed to why I then got into a panic, because I felt like there was a lot of expectation for me to do a good job of it. I'd already written the essay once and a teacher had given me a really good mark for it, so I felt like, yeah, this I can do. In exam situations, I don't even know how to describe it. It just feels kind of like the room is spinning sometimes, not literally, but that's kind of how it feels inside. Stomach twisting, feeling kind of sick with anxiety. I get this funny feeling of like, I'm not really here. Am I really here? Is this moment real? Where I just can't believe this is actually happening. This like intense, stressful moment is actually going on in that moment. It becomes really weird to me, and I have like kind of an existential crisis of, am I really here? What is happening? Anyway, I think I was crying and shaking, and I lifted my hand and they allowed me to go into a toilet cubicle. They gave me a mint and I went in there and had a cry, and then eventually I came back and they did give me some extra time at the end of the exam to make up for it, which was really kind. I'm not sure how much of that they were actually technically supposed to or allowed to do, because I wasn't down for extra time. I didn't have any diagnoses at the time of anything at all, and I'm really hoping that I don't get so
somebody had their head screwed on straight and realized that for whatever reason she was having a, quote, panic attack, which isn't what it was, but it's really cool that somebody was that awesome.
Break down again like I did in my last English exam. I hate theme parks, and I tried to go with my partner once when we were first getting together, and I went and sat down on a ride and then I completely had a panic and I just got off and ran off the ride. The thing hadn't come down over me yet, and the harness, I don't know what you call it, the bars, the stuff that traps you there. You can see maybe why I didn't like this as a PDA anyway. So yeah, I ran. I have no regrets. I think the ride actually ended up going upside down, and my partner hadn't realized that the ride went upside down. So Yeah, I saved myself there. Good on you, Meg. You run for your life.
Megan got on the ride and then ran away.
Chickened out.
She chickened out. He just like sat down and then had a little panic.
Ran away.
And just ran.
But you went on it and what did you said that you it was probably good
yeah, it was probably a good
decision.
decision because it was quite.
It went upside down. They're trying to get me once I go upside down. Moderate thrill sounds like my thing. Definitely. Number 6, I think one of the best words ever to describe what PDA feels like is claustrophobia. I'd used the word claustrophobia to describe how I feel in a job situation before, and then when I was looking into PDA the first time, which I always find it really an emotional experience reading about PDA because it's just very, very close to home, and it feels like someone's stolen your diary and put it all over the internet. It's really weird. So if you have that feeling, you're probably PDA. And I saw somebody had used the word claustrophobia. It may even have been in relation to employment, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is so me. I don't think any person on this earth likes
There is nothing more terrifying than feeling that you don't have control. For me, what's even more terrifying is feeling that you don't have any control yourself. For instance, right now, I feel extremely restless and I don't know why. There's some kind of demand or something that's bothering me right now. And I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. So right now I am really antsy.
Feel controlled or trapped. I think there's a reason why prison is a punishment. There's a reason why people seek out autonomy in job roles. People want freedom. They don't want to be micromanaged. I think it's a normal survival response that every human has, but I think in people with PDA it is triggered so much more easily. So it's hard because if you say, I don't like being told what to do at work, everyone's going to go, oh, neither do I.
Yeah.
I have stories about managers that they hated and things like that, but they don't quite understand the extent, and there's no way to measure that.
It's
it's kind of like your
impossible.
word against theirs. But I think if you just look at your life,
They're just like, yeah. Well, it's like, I don't like, they say I don't like my manager and I don't like flies bothering me, and it may be the same amount of difficulty for them as a fly buzzing around and that being somewhat annoying as their boss. It may not be devastating to their when they want to take their life because they are so stressed out by it.
if you're a PDAer versus someone who just says, oh, I don't like being told what to do, but they've worked a full-time job since they were 18. And you look at your life, which has maybe had more ups and downs and droppings out and more mental health crises and stuff like that, you can see maybe this doesn't feel the same for both of us.
Interrupted job histories are a big sign, particularly if people say that they quit such and such job and maybe they don't know why.
Having a job to me completely feels like a threat. It feels like being held at gunpoint. I will pay you this much if you give me a whole entire year of your life between this time and this time. I own you now, you poor unfortunate soul. To me, the exchange, the giving up of my freedom feels in no way worth it. And if someone was to offer me more money, it would probably make me want to run away even harder, because then there's even more expectation, even more pressure on you to perform. The word freelance to me from a young age sounded like just the most beautiful word. I kind of picture a butterfly when I hear that word. I feel like if somebody told me tomorrow I have to go out and work a job and work for somebody else, my whole life would fade to grey. In the past, I have been able to mask and get on with kind of job situations when I've had part-time jobs and little things, but I would usually kind of need time away from the mask and, being like, yeah, sure, I can do that, that's no problem. I had to go and have a little bit of a cry and a bit of a panic in a toilet cubicle and things like that. And if I was working a full-time job, that probably would be a staple of my day, which would not be ideal, I don't think, for like peak mental health. I feel like I'd lose all creativity and there wouldn't be very much of me left over. Strangely, I do also suffer with like claustrophobia in a physical sense. I didn't realize this, but I hated going in lifts as a child, so it should be obvious. But I went for an MRI scan. I lay down and they started rolling the machine back, and I was like, oh hell no. And I was laughing with the guy and I was like, I didn't expect to have a reaction to this, I don't know what's going on. And he was like, oh, loads of people do, it's fine, you can just go to your GP and get a tranquilizer and come back. I was like, no. I'm gonna do it. And I just made myself do it. This was before I had a diagnosis. Maybe I would have been kinder.
And see, like, I don't even like tranquilizers because then I lose that kind of control because I'm tranquilized. I don't want to be knocked out, because then I lose that control.
To myself, but I also hate taking medications because I have all sorts of weird reactions to things. So I'm just like, if I can avoid it, I'd rather avoid some sort of side effect ruining my day. But I just had to close my eyes, not look at all at how close the ceiling was to my face, and then just breathe very, very consciously through the whole thing. The whole half an hour of lying there. And there were so many times where I felt like I was about to panic. You have to stay still when you're in an MRI, so I don't want to start writhing around in panic. But yeah, I took very deep breaths and felt like I was swallowing all the time, and it was really awful. So I don't know whether
so
that's a
loud.
common thing that other PDAs feel. In the roller coaster scenario, it's also, you know, being trapped. I can't move, I have no choice. I have family members who are very similar to me who like doing things that I would probably find kind of claustrophobic sometimes, like diving and things like that. Number 7.
Coors Banquet, the same brewing tradition since 18...
feels like a very strong fear of getting things wrong. I feel a need to get things right all of the time. Making mistakes can be very upsetting for us. For me, it definitely triggers an existential crisis about like how useless I am and how there's no point in me doing everything and how I just want to tear down everything I've ever done. I've always been called a perfectionist by other people.
Last night I had a dream about, that the maths exam that I did on Monday was just a mock, and I got to redo the test and I knew every single question and it was just amazing. It was so great. And then I woke up.
I find making decisions very difficult, and when I'm making decisions, I feel like there is a right answer somewhere written in the universe, and my thoughts just churn and churn about it. I feel like if I think about it enough, if I talk about it and go round and round about the same topic with people in my life enough, I will eventually reach this right answer, which is like a truth written in the universe. There must be a right answer. I think this is one of the reasons why PDAs hate being watched. For me, if someone is looking at me, my computer screen and what I'm doing, and they comment on it or something, or even if I just feel
I cannot stand somebody watching me do anything. Micromanaging employees or employers that are bosses that like to quote look over your shoulder. I can't do it. I'm incapable of doing it, and I mean literally incapable of doing it. Like, I cannot function. I could not do my job if someone is just sitting there staring over my shoulder. I stop. I can't progress.
Feel them watching, little hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That's what it feels like, and like, ooh, again, like a kind of prickling under my skin feeling, and I'm just like, no, don't look. I much prefer being like kind of hunched over a laptop and everything being kind of secret until I feel like it's just right, you know. I don't want anybody to see anything before I feel like I'm ready for people to see things. I would get into trouble kind of in college in English classes because we'd sometimes have to do work on computers, and it's something about computers because you can't hunch over, you know, a computer in the same way. The screen is kind of feels like it's exposed to the world, and she would be like, you should probably do some work in the actual lesson, and I would prefer to just kind of sit there in the lesson, not do all that much, and then do the work once I got home, because then I felt more confident to do things, strangely. And I hate somebody watching me. Like, if someone stays over at my house, they'll watch me do my makeup the next day, and sometimes people will say things like, oh, I love watching people do their makeup, it's really soothing, and I'm like, oh, it feels like this. I don't know if any PDAs can relate to that sound. Is kind of how demands feel to me, that like danger, like warning. Some PDAs will literally rip up their work if you kind of praise them while they're in the middle of doing something, or even praise them after they've done something, because then there's an implied expectation that they're going to do something like that again in the future. So praise can make you feel kind of similar to criticism sometimes. Still feel free, as I always say, to praise me in these videos. I am an insecure, fragile person. Thank you. And this maybe links to number 8, which is that for me, PDA feels like a very low self-esteem. I always feel like I strive for perfection to kind of try and counteract that, and like I'm always trying to prove myself, whether this comes from times where you have been doubted or...
And a lot of times I think this is just an autistic overachieving. All autistics tend to pretty much overachieve in one way or another, because we have so many deficits, and it's so difficult to do things. When there is something that we can do and we can achieve at, then we really, really go overboard on that.
maybe called things like lazy, and people have misunderstood you, and therefore you feel like you need to prove yourself as a result. I don't know, because I was given a lot of encouragement as well growing up. I came across teachers who were not great, obviously, and there were a lot of people who didn't understand me throughout my life, and I did feel like I had a lot of weaknesses that were more obvious than other people maybe. But I also feel like I wasn't made to feel like, complete trash. So I don't know about that. Maybe it is just something ingrained in us. Ironically, you might not expect it for a PDA, or when you hear the name, I have always pushed myself very hard, and I know many other PDAs who are very determined as well. Some of that was me counteracting the PDA. I just felt like I'm inherently deep down a lazy person, and so therefore I would scream at myself to get things done, and then I would be praised for it. I wasn't super popular at school. It was one way that I could count on having some sort of external validation, and for me, even though I don't always like direct praise, and my immediate thing can be to kind of shut it down, and it can make me feel a bit, kind of twitchy and not great. I'm like, But in general, I do want people to approve of me. I do want people to like me. So I kept going, and I kept pushing more and more and more, and turning up the volume on how much I demanded of myself. And I felt like I was dirt, and like it didn't matter how I felt about anything, and it didn't matter if things felt hard for me, and just kind of bulldozed and fought my way through each day, having very, very little regard for my own mental or physical health. And related to the praise thing and the ripping up your work, I don't know how other PDAs feel about this, I never feel like happy or comfortable or content with my own accomplishments. I don't feel like they mean much to me. Number 9, criticism or telling me I've done something wrong or that I should have done something differently. The word should, they are deeply upsetting to me. They give me an instant rush of dysphoria. My stomach drops. Even very, very small criticisms can feel like a huge slap in the face. I think part of the oh, you've got something in your teeth, you should remove that, to me feels not just a demand that I should remove it, but also a criticism. I suppose most criticisms kind of have demands built into them of you should do things differently. But it's also the feeling of oh my god, I've messed up. I'm never going to come back from this. This is the end of the world. Because I suppose you feel like you tried your hardest and you put in so much effort and you still couldn't control your behavior perfectly.
It seems like the hardest is trying your hardest is never hard enough. It's never enough.
To create the outcome that someone wanted. So number 10, PDA, an anxiety-driven need to remain in control. Obviously, control is a big part of it. A need to be in control, to steal bits of control wherever you can. And there have been many times where I've felt like my life is spiraling around me, and therefore I have latched onto something that I could control. This is where you can start having kind of OCD-like behaviors. And I think there are many times in my life where I could have maybe been diagnosed with OCD. If I had spoken to someone, they probably wouldn't have thought autism at the time, but they may very well have thought OCD. There was a time where I was obsessed with washing my hands, and basically after touching anything I had to wash my hands. I got eczema. I used to need the people around me in my life to also wash their hands, particularly if they were touching my things. This dark, heavy feeling I got whenever I felt like my hands were unclean was very, very intense, and then once I'd washed them it would feel like very momentary relief, and then it would come back again very soon after it. Eventually I did just kind of grow out of doing that, but there are other things that have come up throughout my life, such as forcing myself into a very strict and rigid routine that is so counterintuitive, but sometimes for a short while that could be a coping mechanism that would work for me, trying to control myself, because sometimes that feels like the only thing you can control, and kind of crack the whip at myself and be like, no, you need to do this at this time, you have to, and fight against that instinct. And this obviously links in very closely with eating disorders. She warned that autistic teenage girls seem to...
I've been trying to stick to a schedule of 6 to 8, or at least starting at 6, Monday through Friday here, and there have been some obligations that have kept me from doing it, but getting started at 6 every time has been so difficult to me, and I'm really, really working to push harder because it's a demand.
Be particularly at risk of developing eating disorders, and said that some adult PDA women have reported controlling their eating as a way of internalizing their demand avoidance, rather than reacting externally with a meltdown once they have reached their teenage years. Very, very small things can cause you to feel out of control. For me, a big one is losing something can very, very quickly have you spiraling into feeling like everything is wrong, and then also things going wrong with projects that you're working on, things within your special interest. For me, that was always one of the major triggers, aside from exhaustion from masking. overthinking and things like that, of meltdowns as a child. When something went wrong with something I was working on the computer, I could get frustrated more so than sensory things, although sensory things did cause me problems, particularly sounds. For me, the lack of control thing was always the biggest, most upsetting thing in my life. Number 11, PDA might feel like... Hey, Meta. Equalize situations. You might feel like in order to be okay, you have to have the last word and have little ways of getting your own back. So I used to paint my nails every day at school. We had to wear uniform and we weren't really supposed to. And that was kind of my little rebellion.
Today, I wore this headband because it's beautiful to school. And so all the teachers were fine. None of the teachers said anything. And then one teacher comes out and goes, Megan, you need to take off that headband. That's not school uniform. Well, yeah, because I really thought, you know, this headband was part of the school uniform. I mean, look at it. Kind of an insult to my headband in a way. And so then I was like, okay, I'll go and take it off in a minute in the toilet so I can actually see, because I'm not just going to pull it off my head. So then she just walks off and this other teacher comes, she goes, Megan, you should not wear that, it's not school uniform. I'm like, another teacher's just told me, I just said I'm going to take it off in the toilet. And then she goes, no, you take it off right now. And I was like, I need to see my hair because otherwise it's going to look a mess. And she was like, I'll get a mirror now and you take it off. So I just took it off on the spot and it was like, because my fringe is growing out, do they think I just put a headband in to make it look pretty? Kind of need the headband in, and this is kind of the only one I've got. And then I just marched out and went to the toilets and put it back on because, you know, that's what rebels do. And I had nail varnish on as well, but they didn't notice that.
I feel like I personally can be quite a prideful person, and sometimes if my husband asks me to do something, I will actually do it for him, but he knows I might just have to swear at him first. And it's like a jokey thing now. I wouldn't have done it in the past before I realized that.
That is a very, very common PDA thing. You want to go to the store? No. As you're getting your keys and walking towards the door. Do you want to eat? No. As you're like going to get something to eat. I don't know why if we say no, it allows us to do said action.
I'm a PDA, but now that I know, maybe in the past I would have just got irritable with him and just be like, oh, why can't you do it yourself? Whereas now I'll be like, that is, you know, kind of a reasonable request. I would actually kind of like to help him. I do love him. I will, but I might be a little bit grumpy while I do it. And I'm just going to have to say the F word first. And it's not that deep. It's fine. I really dislike imbalances of authority. It's, a thing with autistic people in general that we have a strong sense of justice. And I think this can be a really, really wonderful thing about PDA. There are many times where, despite being a shy person who most of the time, kind of internalized my whole personality, I would stand up for people. I felt like a teacher had been unfair or something, I would speak up for it. And I'm glad of that. I went vegan when I was 14 at a time when it was very, very not socially acceptable to be vegan. And there were basically no vegan foods in the supermarket because, once I'd read a bit about veganism, I was like, yeah, why should somebody have to die and lose their entire life, something that is very valuable to them, so that I can eat a sandwich that I don't even enjoy that much, when I could just put something different on the sandwich that I could enjoy equally as much, And I'm very proud of that. It's like you're sometimes propelled by this force inside yourself to set things right, and sometimes that can make you behave in a sort of petty, immature way, and sometimes that can make you do really wonderful things. So, yeah. Number 12, as a PDA, you may, when you're very burnt out, feel kind of cognitively impaired. So when I was doing my exams at the end of high school, I remember just feeling like
I don't know if this is directly PDA. I definitely experienced this, don't get me wrong, but I don't know that it is
do anything.
Definitely
like my brain wasn't working
PDA
properly, like it was just spinning and spiraling and just electricity running through it, and it was like malfunctioning. And I remember somebody asking me to write in their yearbook, and I just felt like I didn't know how to form a sentence, and I did, and I'm sure what I wrote made sense, but it felt like it wasn't going to make any sense. And often in exams around this time I would start writing things and then cross them out because I just feel like this is nonsense, this makes no sense, but I think actually what I was writing was fine and I was just wasting time. And then sometimes I would miss really big, like, high mark questions at the end of the exam because I'd been crossing out and rewriting basically the same thing again and again. But I was in just such a state of panic that I just couldn't think rationally anymore. Number 13, as a PDA you may feel momentarily momentary safety from doing the wrong thing. So while trying to plan out this video, I kept Googling song lyrics of clips from the Eras tour. I was watching some 1975 interviews. You may find that you procrastinate a lot, and particularly the more pressure you feel on something or the more kind of energy it's going to take from you, the more you can feel this need to procrastinate. And then obviously you still have the guilt of what you have to do looming over you while you're doing those things. And
even doing this show, when I'm doing the commentary and so forth, and watching all the monitors and everything else, I was trying to say hello to like Jonathan, who's been here. Thank you, by the way, for being here for this. It is very, very
feeling like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I write a to-do list every day, and I've said before, I have to kind of do things in the wrong order in order to feel kind of a sense of control. I've never been able to keep to a rigid routine. I don't really have a set bedtime or a set wake-up time.
This was not my finest day. It really wasn't.
Did you see that? I'm sorry. Okay, that was so autistic.
Things and this feeling like, oh, I shouldn't.
That
be doing
was so autistic. Her list here.
Before, I have to kind of do things.
Make my bed
in the wrong order in order to feel.
Eat breakfast. Like now, I would have to take my medicine.
Kind of a sense of control. I've never been able to keep.
Take a shower. These are so autistic because these are things that are so hard for us to do and remember to do.
To a rigid routine. I don't really have a set bedtime or a set wake-up time.
This was not my finest day. It really wasn't. I ended up waking up at about 3 in the end, like properly, finally. I did wake up a couple of times before then, but I went to bed at 5 in the morning again, and eventually it caught up with me. It took its time, but eventually it caught up with me and I just couldn't get up. I just like working better at night. I just feel like I can get more done. I just feel more inspired or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know.
And I always felt like that was childish and immature and like really disorganized, but I get a lot of stuff done, so I just, now I'm at a point where I'm like...
The sad thing, Jonathan, is that's like normal stuff. Like, my wife now, we used to do it together, but now she goes and does some house sitting and so forth or whatever, and I may not take a shower the entire time she left. She just got back a couple of days ago, and like she came home and instead of giving a big kiss and everything else, it's like I didn't want to be close to her because like I know I haven't showered in a couple of days, and so I'm like, maybe I probably stink. So as soon as I get done with this, I have got to go take a shower just so I can be close to my wife.
I don't think it matters, but sometimes you really do have to do something, and that's where I end up procrastinating. If I force myself to keep to a routine, which I have tried to do many times in my life, it makes me feel really heavy. Basically very similar to how going to a job would feel, to be honest. I don't feel like the freedom of working for myself anymore. And every day I pick out the clothes that my son's going to wear the next day and I leave them out. And I'll maybe have a few t-shirts to choose from, and whichever one I pick, my brain is like, you made the wrong choice. Pick a different one, pick a different one. And I have the urge, and sometimes I do. I'm reaching out for one shirt, sometimes...
What, they aren't color-coded too? I mean, they are folded exactly. Let's look at this. But they're not color-coded too?
Pick a different one, pick a different one. And I...
What? She probably knows what each pattern looks like on each shirt, though.
Have the urge, and sometimes I do. I'm reaching out for one.
And did you see how she put it in a very particular place? So there's a certain order that they do go into. She didn't just shove it in at the end there. She shoved it in the middle in exact particular place.
Last minute, my hand will change, and I'll be like, no, I'm going to do that shirt instead. And whichever option I pick feels kind of like the wrong answer. And because there isn't a set right answer, I don't think my brain likes that very much. Maybe it's to do with black and white thinking, and it kind of sends me into like a mini spiral. I feel like a knot in my stomach.
You know, I was going to take a shower today, and I got distracted by about 3 or 4 other things, and eventually I ended up taking a nap. Then I woke up and was like, oh, it's showtime. And so I had to get up and do this.
Like, even picking like which pair of underwear, if there's a pile of underwear and I just take the one from the top of the pile, I'm like, yeah, but was that the right pair of underwear? I have to just kind of like take a breath and just be like, nope, these are the clothes I'm putting aside from him, and just try and ignore those thoughts. But obviously that's really exhausting. How many decisions do you make in a day? And feeling like sometimes I have to subvert those decisions. Like, oh, I decided last night, I think I'm gonna have this for breakfast today. I'm gonna have this instead. Boo. You know, and kind of like this energy your brain is putting in needing to switch up just little minor things in your day. Rico PDA, I think, describes this feeling quite well. For me, it's like being a poorly designed, constantly malfunctioning robot. Every button I press has the opposite reaction to my intentions. Every day I wake up not knowing how I'm going to act and what will happen. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you roughly what I think is going to happen, but no, I do feel to some extent I am slightly unpredictable. And I can never be predictable unless I want to hurt my mental health. I have to kind of leave myself a bit of this freedom to make some wacky choices in my day. I've always found that I think it's better for me to have multiple projects going at once, because then I can bounce from one to the other. If I'm just doing one thing and my life feels engulfed by that one thing, then it can become tricky. But the problem is when you've got multiple projects going on at the same time, you also then have more to do and life can become more demanding and more stressful. So I always think I enjoy doing something the most when I feel like I don't have to do it and I'm doing.
I would like to see hear her play guitar, though. It's amazing to me how many musicians there are among the autism spectrum. I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, as an optional thing, and it's just because I want to, and doing things early for me can be quite a nice feeling, like, haha, look, I'm not supposed to be doing this yet because it's not true for ages.
Yeah, I've noticed that there are a lot of people on the autism spectrum that play instruments. Do you play any instruments, Jonathan?
You can feel like pure bliss and euphoria when you're standing.
I play guitar.
And you're kind of in these rich imaginary worlds that you can create for yourself. So as a child, I used to flap my hands when I first went to nursery and walk around, and I think it was my way of kind of dissociating and removing myself from a situation that I found stressful and I didn't want to be there, and I was away from my mom for the first time ever. She had been my whole world and my safety, and I would just flap my hands and tell stories and imagine the children in different...
Okay, so thank you, Jonathan. I can now say that I've known one autistic that doesn't play an instrument. Thank you for that. I can say I know one.
Different scenarios and things like that. That feeling when I flap my hands, and now I still do it. I still do it every day. I flap objects. One of the reasons again why I love working for myself, because I will have the confidence to do that when I'm on my own or just around my partner. Even then,
I actually have a swath here. Let me see where it is. Like this. Just sitting here doing this is the same exact thing what she's talking about.
Still sometimes feel a little bit of embarrassment about it because it was something that I was made to feel embarrassed about as I got older in school, when I still did it by mistake sometimes. But it gives me a feeling of lightness. I don't know if other people get this feeling from stimming. It feels like meditative, like I'm an out-of-body experience of just like kind of pure joy and pure immersion in something, and I'm so creative when I'm in that state. And that's how I revised for exams. I would sim and I would repeat facts again to myself and I would remember them all, and it felt like I had access to this other level of being or something. I don't know if that's all just to do with dopamine, but I do know very easily how to access that state of euphoria, and I can get there if I want to, and I can come up with ideas. I can be very creative. It's like my happy place, and it's one of my favorite things about being alive, and probably is the happiest I ever am, is when I'm in that state, and also when I get into a deep flow state on my interests. And to some extent that could be kind of sad, like both times it's because it's kind of an out-of-body experience and I forget about the anxiety and the expectations because I'm engulfed in something else, but at the same time it is just a really lovely feeling. And other people don't have that same relationship. Even if they have hobbies and interests, they don't feel as much of an intense need to be doing them all the time at the expense of other things in their life. And to me that just suggests they must feel really good for me. It's amazing how we can adapt to our abilities without knowing the reason behind them, but it's even more amazing how much more we can cope when we understand them. I don't think I ever could have understood myself as well as I do now if I hadn't been able to read stories from other PDAs. Just the knowledge that it isn't laziness, it isn't something I've done on purpose. I'm not secretly deep down a horrible person who every day is just trying their best not to be a like walking disaster. But the response I get to things is often an overreaction of my nervous system, and knowing that that is a physiological thing and not something that I've caused and not something that I need to work on or change about myself. It's just something I can accept and then learn to live with is such a relief. And it's such a relief of pressure that I was putting on myself for so many years, which is obviously great for a PDA. You know, anything you can do to lift the weight is wonderful. If you want some more videos about PDA, I have a PDA playlist, which I'll leave on screen. I have a video where I do a PDA test, which has 50 questions, which was created by Sally Cat and...
Alrighty, yeah, she's closing out there. I like her
Ensure your passion. Here's how...
She's definitely a great creator. Maybe it's someday I'll get to interview her or something. That'd be kind of fun. Okay, this is Autistic AF, a wonderful creator. He does lives regularly, almost daily. I definitely recommend his channel. All these creators are great creators. But
Friends,
he's
I'm Mike, a
definitely
late
he's definitely one worth listening to.
diagnosed autistic adult, and today we're going to talk about PDA, or Pathological Demand Avoidance Syndrome. Now, this is a phrase coined by the British psychologist Elizabeth Newton in the 1980s. And PDA was first mentioned in her paper, Pathological Demand Avoidance Syndrome, a necessary distinction within the pervasive developmental disorders, and that was in 2003. PDA, like most autism topics, was used by parents of autistic children informally throughout the 1990s. So, like most things, PDA is described pathologically.
Now, see, that's interesting because I discovered I was autistic 3 years ago, and it really was not until this a little over a year ago that I started hearing about PDA on a consistent basis.
A lot of it uses holistic or non-autistic language to describe the behaviour of children on the spectrum who avoid demands. Now, I started this channel to provide helpful resources and community for adults, and I will state my sources, just like I did earlier, so if you disagree or have any points to clarify or disagree with me on, please do likewise and provide your sources. Your experiences don't need references, so please feel free to share them in the comments below. What is PDA? Now, PDA is not currently recognised in the DSM-5. Now, that's the 5th edition of...
And neither is it in the ICD-11 or the DSM-5-TR. They still are not there. In the ICD-TR and the ICD-11 just both came out. So it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years. There is no telling how long before the next edition comes out. And even then, we don't know if it will actually be in the books.
Of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Their words, not mine, which is a widely used diagnostic tool in the United States and is referenced worldwide. It also isn't recognised or listed in the ICD-11, which is a similar manual published by the World Health Organization. Now, it's worth pointing out now that just because something is not currently recognised, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
It's crazy when you're doing these blind react videos and stuff. That happens so often. It just shows how our autistic minds really do, in fact, think alike when we say the same exact thing.
Now, autism was first identified and diagnosed by the psychiatrist Leo Kanner in 1943. That doesn't mean that nobody was autistic before the 1940s. It's fair to say that autistic people have always been part of the human population. Famous historical people's autistic traits are in the historical accounts. Let me know if you'd like to see speculating on which famous historical people could be hidden autists in a topic for another video. The interest in PDA has been steadily growing over time. These two little bumps in interest are the first ever PDA Awareness Day on the 15th of May 2015, and the next spike in interest was when the PDA Society published its guide, the first of its type, describing PDA in 20...
So is this resonating with you, or is this something that you think that might be the case for you, or is your audio ADHD experience different from this?
2021. So, PDA isn't officially recognised, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a useful label for a set of behaviours. But what exactly is it? Now, nobody likes being told what to do they? So let's break this apart.
This is one thing about the PDA autism protile. It's a protile. I don't want to know what a protile is, but we're just going to go with it. It's the protile. It's a profile that actually I think is very common, particularly among our audio ADHDers. I think it's very common. And I like the level system stuff like that. When we say high functioning and low functioning, that just makes me cringe and so forth. And I don't like separating them. I don't like the Asperger's or whatever, because I do not want to dehumanize those with more support needs. This being said, I think it's very, very important that PDA be recognized. For example, now my psychiatrist, I've mentioned PDA, and I mentioned that my flight response is on, and he's putting me on particular medications to help with that flight response. Abilify is what I'm on in particular. That's one of them, and the thing is it really does help with that flight response. It's kind of like ADHD medicines. Does it fix the autism? Of course not, but it does help to where I'm not on edge all the time as much. So it being able to identify it has been extremely helpful for me, and I've just happened to be, I guess, blessed, if you want to say that. I'm not religious, but lucky, if you will, that I have a doctor that is supporting that need and that does recognize that autistic people do at least have a flight response, even if he does not particularly recognize PDA himself.
Nutshell, PDA is the label given to those who irrationally avoid even the most routine demands.
Right. Well, okay, personally, I say that I could, even with the sensitivities, and as much as I hate the sensitivities for my autism, okay, if I could choose to drop one or the other, of course, I would want to stay autistic all day long. I don't want to be cured of being autistic. Now, you can take the ADHD any day, anytime. I'm good with it. I do not need that ADHD whatsoever. I cannot stand the ADHD, but I like the way my brain functions as an autistic person and how it allows me to think and use reason and logic, and also my unorthodox thinking. And now my quote gift, if anything else, I study really, or I score very low on all the psychological testing. Like I can't even pass on myself, I do terrible on them. But the one place I do is abstract thought, and that is from the autism, and not the ADHD. The ADHD makes me to where I can't think and can't concentrate. So it's definitely the part that I would love to get rid of.
Or suffer rising anxiety due to them. PDA profile is considered separate to, but distinct from, autism on the autism spectrum. PDA is a somewhat controversial, not universally accepted anxiety disorder condition, and it's possible to have a professional psychologist or psychiatrist indicate PDA profile on your diagnostic paperwork, but PDA is not clinically recognised.
Wait, I am so confused.
Are you confused yet? Firstly, please don't shoot the messenger. I don't like these terms. I get really frustrated sometimes when I read the experiences written online from, say, I'm going to say it, the parents of autistic children. No offense, there's some great parents of autistic children.
Yeah, I got to talk about this here in the next couple of days, but a lot of times I think the psychological evaluations are completely wrong, and how they. Okay, I understand testing or whatever for autism, but when you give us just a regular test for a regular psychological evaluation, it doesn't apply to us because we're PDA. And I think the results that are interpreted, because, like, let's say for depression, they're looking at a neurotypical brain, and all of psychology is focused on a neurotypical brain. And I think psychology should be completely split for neurodivergence. That's Tourette's people, schizophrenics, ADHD, autism. What's not PDA, but the other one that it's conflated with I want to say occupational, oppositional defiant disorder. All those are on the spectrum, and those should be treated. I think an autism doctor should be a neurologist first, and I think that our doctors on the neurodivergent spectrum should be neurologists first. If they want to get a second degree or a subsequent degree in psychology, fine and dandy. But first of all, it needs to be recognized that it is a neurological disorder that causes subsequent mental health issues. But it's not that we're mentally ill and it causes us to do autistic stuff. And what they try to do is treat our quote mental illness, our depression, and all this stuff when that's not the root issue of the problem. That's not why we're actually needing mental health. We're needing mental health because we're neurodivergents and we interact with the world differently. I hope I'm making sense there.
Community, but.
And once again, this is autistic as AF that we're looking at here.
Hey friends, I'm Mike, a late diagnosed autistic adult, and today
just totally lost my place there.
Demand avoidance. Making a choice on a menu? That could be seen to demand too. Can you think of any others? Comment section below, not a demand.
Now, like I said before, as far as the menu is concerned, if I go to a restaurant or whatever, if it has too many things on the menu, it will flip me out. And a lot of times I'll end up looking at my wife and she knows, and she'll be like, look, there's a hamburger, or she'll say there's a burrito or something that she knows that I like, something with green chili or something, and so she'll help me with that. She also does the ordering, because the waiter will come up and he'll be like, do you want Caesar salad, this kind of salad, whatever kind of salad? And then there's 15, I swear, there are 50 different salad dressings or whatever. And by the time they get to the second one, do you want this, that, or that? I just hear, do you want ranch? Do you want blue cheese? Do you... And then they stop and look at you. And you're like, huh? So my wife is gracious enough. Thank goodness she helps me with that. I also have a little bit of audio processing disorder. So with all the noise, and particularly if it happens to be a waitress, and they have a higher, shriller voice, I just don't hear anyway. So I am very, very, very lucky to have the wife that I do have, because she takes care of me constantly.
You know what I mean. Demand avoidance involves not being able to do certain things at certain times, either for yourself or for others. And it also refers to the things we do in order to avoid demands, states the PDA Society. It makes a point to say that this is a natural human behaviour, something that we all do. The following 3 traits are suggested by the PDA Society as traits of PDA. The first one is that many normal, everyday demands are avoided simply because they've been identified as a demand, and therefore a feeling of a lack of control and anxiety increases. I can relate to this.
And that's the big thing. It's not that someone has put a demand on you. It's the feeling of lack of control. And that's if I have to go to the bathroom. I could have to go potty. And that could be a problem, because my body is forcing me to go to the bathroom. And which is very, very important, obviously.
Number 2, that the demand anxiety is irrational. And the example is given of a seemingly dramatic reaction to a tiny request, or this example, the feeling of hunger inexplicably stopping you from being able to eat. And the third point here is that the avoidance can vary. Now this is a little DSM-like. Similar to the autistic criteria C in DSM-5, traits must be present in childhood. The PDA Society state that traits are involuntary and lifelong. The traits of a PDA. The PDA Society...
I think the PDA Society is out of the UK, by the way. This UK has been on the ball on this one. And this is not the UK government, unfortunately. The UK government sucks. I didn't say that aloud. But yeah, but as far as with neurodivergence and autism and so forth, the UK government is absolutely horrible and extremely insensitive towards autistic people, just as the United States is. But the United States is even further behind. So as much as I knock the UK, yes, unfortunately, us in the United States, we're even worse. But it is now just starting to be recognized, or at least understood by some physicians. And that's why having these discussions is so important, because as more and more people come asking their doctors, what is PDA? Then when the doctors have their doctor conventions and all that stuff, the PDA is more and more likely to come up, and then hopefully we can make a difference. Instead of some scientists locked up with a bunch of autistics trying to figure stuff out on their own. We already know, we experience it, so we should be the ones taking that initiative and then letting them think that they're really smart and they figured it all out on their own, so they can write their papers and get rich off of all the work that we did.
He gives us further the following traits to look out for. 1. Resisting and avoiding the ordinary demands of life. This includes making attending appointments, I'm really bad at this, through to everyday activities like washing, dressing and using the bathroom.
I actually, there's a counselor that I am supposed to be seeing. And I was at the doctor's office and my wife asked me if I wanted to make an appointment with this counselor. And I said no. And the reason is because calling up this doctor's office, they have messages and stuff like that, and they don't get back to you. The system hangs up on me. And the last 2 times I tried to make an appointment with this, I ended up in such a meltdown that I was yelling and screaming at the people once I did get on, because they had caused this meltdown and made it so traumatic for me to try to make an appointment because they were hanging up on me and I was they weren't following through. They would say they would call within 3 days. You wait 3 days, you wait 4 days, nobody calls back, and so forth. And it caused so much trauma for me to try to make an appointment that it literally was not worth making the appointment. So literally I was so in need of counseling and so in need of help that I am incapable of getting said help.
Explanation number 1, the double empathy problem. Sometimes demands are explicit and they're made in a confusing way. Could you do the dishes? Is a demand that isn't actually clear. Oh, you mean stack the dishwasher? What about putting them away afterwards? How about...
Or, yes, I could.
In a work scenario, could you handle this customer, please? Sorry, what do you mean handle? What would you like me to do with them? Now or later? Such questions can be seen as prevaricating. And prevarication is a trait of PDA. The double empathy problem, proposed by autistic researcher Dr. Damien...
And he just used a really big word that I have never heard, but I'm going to pretend like I knew exactly what he said. Prevaricating? I had never heard that one.
Milton in 2012 challenges the traditional view that social difficulties in autism are solely down to the autistic individual's defects. I want you to note that at the time of the Double Empathy Problems 2012 paper, pathological demand avoidance had already been discussed for 30 years already, 9 of which we know in the scientific literature. We now know that there is a mutual misunderstanding that can arise as a result of mismatched, is what I wanted to say, emotional experience and expressions between autistic and non-autistic people. These difficulties are bidirectional and can occur in all social interactions. These difficulties must surely be markedly more pronounced for those who are non-speaking too. I've got many stories from school, work and home where someone got frustrated with me and acted as though I was trying to dodge what they must have thought were perfectly reasonable requests. They might call it demand avoidance, where this was clearly just the double empathy problem at play. Alternative explanation 2. What if you were asked to do something against your values or morals? For instance, for me, as a vegan, I wouldn't participate in animal slaughter for food, no matter how nicely I was asked to. This again could be seen as demand avoidance. I mean, it literally is demand avoidance. I'm not complying with that demand. This is a personal belief, and you may have different beliefs. Think of something that you couldn't countenance, and then imagine yourself saying no. Or even failing, maybe falling and feeling the anxiety rise. That's not a good place to be, and it is fair enough to say no. What about those people during the World Wars who refused to go and fight and spent their time in prison instead of the front lines? They were called traitors at the time. Now we call them conscientious objectors. They were very reasonably, conscientiously demand avoidant. Alternative explanation 3. When I was a child, my parents would try to make me wear woolen sweaters. You know the ones, the really scratchy fibres that itched your skin when you moved and tickled you when you sort of sat still. That sort of jumper would put
Okay, I am itchy just with him saying it. Ugh.
My senses on fire right up until a meltdown, or as sometimes they called it, a tantrum, where I was just being silly and rude. My parents simply knew that I had to wear a warm sweater or I'd catch a cold. From their perspective, they were being reasonable. So
And actually, by the way, if you notice, it looks like he is wearing some kind of t-shirt. It looks like there is a t-shirt under here, under his shirt. So and that's probably not even a wool shirt. Maybe it is a wool shirt, but it looks like he's wearing another t-shirt underneath that. And that's why these shirts right here, I wear these. Right now I have the fan on because it's 80 degrees in here. And all I'm doing, the only reason the ceiling fan is on is to equalize the temperature throughout the room. But just that little bit of breeze on my skin actually hurts me. Any kind of cold hurts me. And so that's why I wear, and this one actually even has a hood. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah, there we go.
wear it, leave the house in it, rip it off, hide it in a hedgerow path, so fast before you could even say the word pathological.
Pathological.
I wanted to make a video that might challenge the prevailing narrative of the PDA profile, and I'm not trying to convince anyone that they aren't PDA. Of course, my job here is not to doubt anyone's identity nor to discourage any exploration of this. I encourage you to explore. Those who are suffering the most will be the undiagnosed autistic people, PDA profile or not, who struggle with negative self-talk and struggle with their environments. Those are the folks that I hope this video reaches. But if one identifies as PDA or PDA profile, and to an extent I do, those who know me could see this video and relate this to me, and I wouldn't blame them if they did. But it's important to put PDA in perspective. And maybe my struggles with PDA profile definition are a result of my autistic black and white thinking. I much prefer the label pervasive drive for autonomy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And not just because it's removed the word pathological. I've worked for myself for the last 20 years and prefer to work independently on pretty much everything. The drive, the compulsion for autonomy, for freedom, to choose our own fate, I think is a much better model and explains more than pathological demand avoidance. And it's not pathological in this way, it's honourable, and it's about the drive to be independent, and not the implication of do what you're told subservience that we commonly hear from the term demand avoidance. It's a psychological, technical term, demand avoidance, but commonly misapplied to a belligerent child.
And I hope before it ever gets into the ICD-12 or the DSM-6 or whatever, I hope they change the term. And the psychiatry community, unfortunately, they tend to start out with the worst thing that they can possibly come up with. So my guess is that if it does show up in any mental health books, manuals, it's going to come out as a pathological demand avoidance, just because of how ableist the psychiatry community is. And yes, the psychiatry community is ableist, and I think they're actually not only ableist, but they're the source of most ableism when it comes to psychiatry. But that's just me.
Maybe they just want to be autonomous and independent. Maybe they just want to run around the playground flapping their hands on their own. Leave them be. Don't force them into those interactions just because they're avoiding them. They're not avoiding them. They're being autonomous. However you slice it, the symptoms of PDA are real, although this video focuses on the PDA label itself and the explanations rather than how to deal with this thing that we call demand avoidance. Now, I hope I've explained just a few reasons why autistic people might be seen to avoid demands, and hopefully you can see that it's not laziness, but actually a complex collection of sensory, motor, executive functioning, and social and processing difficulties that drive the strong emotions that we attribute to PDA. Now, if you think that you're PDA, here's a video that you really shouldn't watch next. Don't like this video, don't spin the notification bell. Oh, and congratulations to Mia for winning her copy of Strong Female Character from our first Tea and Tales book club. I'm losing track of which pets have been in which videos, so if you've seen G-Flicus, sorry about that.
Okay, so this is, I'm going to move on. This is the last person to speak, and this person is known as Autistic. And well, once again, another great channel. This is something that I do, a fellow that I really do appreciate his work.
I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic.
Welcome to Autismatic.
No.
Okay, I'm
Me.
shutting down Facebook because I'm getting...
Lo.
There we go.
A. Nein. Όχι. Non.
Wherever you come from, whatever language you speak, no is one of the most powerful words we'll ever learn. For marginalised people in our communities, it can be one of the most important too. That short, unambiguous word is sometimes the only thing that stands between us and misrepresentation, exploitation, and even punishment. Yet despite its lack of ambiguity, it's a word that's misunderstood, ignored, or put into our mouths more perhaps than any other. Today, I want to talk about something that's been a hot-button topic in autism-related academia for some time. Something which has that punchy little word right at its centre. Pathological demand avoidance. Some of the exchanges between academics on the subject have been colourful, shall we say. There seems to be a tacit acceptance of PDA's existence, but where to place it? Some are adamant that it's a trait specific to autistic people, and even suggestions it should be part of the diagnostic criteria. So, what does it mean? Demand avoidance isn't a difficult phrase to digest. It describes a behaviour. When a demand is made of someone who is demand avoidant, they're observed to avoid it. Whether we outright refuse, prevaricate, ask questions, or simply don't do what's been asked of us, it fits into the demand avoidance criteria. Now, the possibility that someone might refuse or not follow through on demands is something we have to be aware of with everyone, autistic or not. And I'm quite happy to accept that it might be more common amongst autistic people than in neurotypical folks. It's the first part of the phrase that sticks in so many autistic craws. When we describe a behaviour as pathological, we're suggesting it's a compulsive or obsessive need to act in a specific manner. It's a biological or psychological need about which we have little or no choice. An addiction of sorts.
And that's technically accurate. That's the problem with the pathological point here. It is technically accurate. It just sounds like crap. It sounds like saying psychopath. You know, it immediately, it has a negative connotation to it. But as far as technically, definition-wise, medically, the term is correct. However, it is extremely damaging to those who are PDA.
In the case of PDA, it's an addiction to saying no.
And not even that, it's an impulsive that we can't help. No, that is something that we can't help. It's not an addiction to saying no so much as I would say is it's a no that we can't help.
Stereotype of the pathological liar who lies by reflex, even when those lies contradict each other or harm them personally.
Or, yeah, even if they don't want to lie, a pathological liar is going to lie because it is literally pathological. They cannot help it. That's why it's called pathological liar.
And the pathological thief who steals things they neither want nor need because they feel a need to steal.
Another term for that is kleptomaniac. People who just literally can't help it. They have to steal or whatever. And so this is a good analogy he's making here.
So if our avoidance of demands is pathological, then it's because there's a disease or fault in our psychological makeup forcing us to do so.
And it's not. I would not say it's a psychological issue as much as a neurological issue. That's why I think that autistic people are doctors. If there was a, quote, neurodivergent doctor, then they need to be neurologist, not psychologist. And now, again, if they want to get some understanding of our psychology, then fine. But we should not be treated like a neurotypical person. And neurotypical mental health should not be applied to us whatsoever in any way, shape, or form.
The PDA concept fits in quite nicely with the autism stereotypes of old. We've long been painted as antisocial loners who can't appreciate the feelings and needs of others, so when we appear unwilling to follow instruction, it's effortless to bundle it together as another symptom or expression of our dysfunctional autistic nature. The term demand in this context is quite flexible too. When I hear the word demand, I'm more likely to think of orders barked out by a cigar-chomping sergeant or a threatening letter from a creditor than I am a polite request. But in the context of PDA, a demand can be any instruction delivered in any manner. Whether the request is made in a friendly way, matter-of-factly, or aggressively, it's still a demand. And whether we say that demand exceeded someone's tolerance or make allowances for circumstance, the expected response from someone who's pathologically demand avoidant is no. Well, today I'd like to say no. No to the current narrative around pathological demand avoidance and the dangerous road it leads us down. Now, before I go any further, I'm not saying that PDA doesn't exist. We share this planet with 8 billion other people. So if nothing else, the balance of probabilities amongst the incredible variety of thought and expression in humanity mean it's completely feasible that people exist who genuinely feel a compelling need to refuse any request or demand made of them, and some of them will be autistic. What I am saying, though, is that much of what has been described as pathological demand avoidance in the past is often nothing of the sort. And I'd like to explain why. A person who either refuses or fails to carry out everything they're asked or told to do can be very frustrating to those around them, but it can also be very limiting to the individual at the centre of the situation too. Someone who is genuinely, pathologically driven to refuse or avoid demands is unlikely to hold down paid employment or run a business. It would complicate their interactions with just about everyone they meet and make life almost impossible to lead independently. But there are millions of autistic people, diagnosed, self-identified, and those still in the dark, who do lead independent lives though. We have jobs, families, social structures and responsibilities, and we manage, to the best of our ability, to function in an often hostile world. Yet now, some of us are finding ourselves encountering talk of PDA in the workplace or in education. That's a danger to all of us. The first time I came across such a story, it chilled me to the bone. But as more started crossing my path and having spoken to a number of people who've encountered difficulties thanks to such talk, I realised that we're facing a new threat in the public perception of autistic people. It's yet another medicalised description of autistic thought and motivation that's been entirely constructed from the views and feelings of people who find neurodivergent differences inconvenient, and it's already causing mischief in the real world. As if we didn't already have enough damaging, out-of-date theories and stereotypes to battle with, now we have to add an irrational need to refuse requests into the mix too.
So, Saver, I don't know how to say it. Saver, it says there's no way this is a real person. What do you mean there's no way this is a real person? What do you mean by that?
Now,
I don't understand.
Because I'm autistic and most of the people I've spoken to on this subject are as well, I'm going to use language that reflects that. But everything we'll be discussing can apply to anyone who is or is perceived to be demand avoidant, whatever their neurodivergence or even if they're neurotypical. Sometimes what is seen as PDA is simply a communication problem. This is something I've had plenty of personal experience of myself. A demand or request is made, but my response is at odds with what the person making the demand expects or wants. Just like the double empathy problem, the person making the demand doesn't understand any response that doesn't match with their expectations, causing dissonance. Often the request that's made isn't clear to me, so I'll ask questions to clarify. I've been at the wrong end of so many misunderstandings in my past, I'm wary of following an instruction until I'm certain of what's expected of me. So instead of leaping into action, I probe further.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're speaking the same verbal language, the meaning of our words and their context don't always get across. What may seem obvious to me may not be so clear to a non-autistic person, and vice versa. They may think their request is unambiguous and requires no clarification, but to me it's unclear, incomplete, or even self-defeating. So I ask for more information. I'm not refusing to cooperate or even prevaricating. I'm missing information either about what you want me to do, how you want me to do it, or what the end goal we are aiming for is. So I ask questions until I'm happy that I understand. But I rarely get all the answers I need before people lose their patience.
Trooper, the kitchen on this rebel vessel displeases me. Sort it out.
Sir, could you be more specific? I'm not sure what you want me to do. I mean, there's a lot into doing. Where do you want me to start?
You are part of the Domestic Alliance and a caterer.
Well, if you just tell me what you want me to do first.
I will not repeat myself, Trooper. Sort out that kitchen or you will feel the true power of the dark side. And no disintegrations.
Is that demand avoidance? I don't think so, but I've been repeatedly told that it is. I understand that to neurotypical minds the request may be as obvious as the speaker thinks it is, but it might not be for me. Treating my questions as hostility or unwillingness doesn't answer them, and certainly won't increase my confidence in trying to carry out your instructions. If your request is ambiguous to me, I will always ask for clarity in the hope of matching your expectations. If you dismiss it as an attempt to get out of the task, you miss the whole point of the question. I want you to be happy with what I do for you, but I need more information to do that. If you don't answer me or get annoyed, then I'll stay in the dark and I will make mistakes.
Why is there no clean cup for my afternoon tea? Why have the dishes not been washed?
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize you wanted that done first.
I find your lack of cooperation disturbing. I ordered you to sort the kitchen out.
But I have been. I emptied out the garbage, scrubbed the cooker, and cleared out the cupboards. I've thrown out all the expired tins and arranged the rest in date order.
Enough. Tidying does not concern me, Trooper. I want a cup of tea, not excuses.
But, sir,
You have failed me for the last time.
When I've miscalculated, like Trooper Gary there, I'm usually told that I'm being silly, childish, deliberately misunderstanding, being contrarian or lazy. Nobody cares that I may have expended far more effort reorganising everything than I would have just washing a few dishes. All that is seen is my lack of compliance with the instruction. There's numerous circumstances where communication differences might lead people to believe we may be avoiding an instruction when we're doing nothing of the sort. It's very common for us to need clarity, and plenty of situations arise where we might misunderstand. But communication can also be a problem in situations where we are avoiding a demand too. What if we're asked to do something which sets our senses on fire, or something morally unjustified? Sometimes we're asked to do things which have consequences the speaker hasn't considered, or they're impractical, even sometimes just nonsensical.
All right, I'm gonna get rid of these commercials at some point in time here, very shortly. Hopefully in the next couple of days.
Sorry, sir. Something got caught in my throat. Do you want me to wash the dishes now, then?
Yes. After you have put everything back as it was before.
But that would mean putting the garbage back in the bins and making the cupboards untidy again.
Don't be too proud of this organizational terror you've constructed. The ability to tidy a kitchen is insignificant next to my need for refreshment.
So, let me get this clear. I'm to wash the dishes so you have a clean cup, and then mess up the kitchen. That doesn't make sense, sir.
I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Being unwilling to do something because the person issuing the instruction hasn't thought it through is far from pathological. It's rational demand avoidance. We might try to argue the point in the hope people will see sense, but all too often we fail.
Mm-hmm.
Our neurodivergent brains don't necessarily see the same benefits as you do, and will often see connections that neurotypical people don't. When we voice our concern, you might take it as a signal of refusal or that we doubt your intentions, and if you weren't dealing with an autist, you may be right. But our comments and questions reflect a rational and thoughtful consideration we feel should be taken into account, and ignoring those concerns won't make them any less important. Of course, those same differences in communication and mental processing might mean it's us who are missing something. We might be worrying about nothing, oversensitive to some part of the request, or just unaware of information that might shift our perspective. Whichever the case, all it takes is a little constructive dialogue to agree a mutually acceptable way forward. Of course,
by the way, how is my voice coming
issues
through?
Become...
how does this sound? And then if I get really loud like that, is it overmodulating, or is it sounding okay here? This is a new microphone, Jonathan.
Even deeper when we consider those of us who are non-speaking, whether ongoing or situational. Even if we have alternative communication methods available to us, we may find it difficult to convey our feelings, our reservations, and our concerns.
Okay, thank you so much.
And what about those of us who simply get tongue-tied when trying to advocate for ourselves? Communication is a two-way street, and neither side should give up just because it's slow, difficult, or confusing. It takes effort from both sides to have a prosperous exchange, and that means that the party making the request has a duty to ensure their demand is clear and worthwhile, however long it takes. Beyond miscommunication, though, there are many reasons why we may be genuinely reluctant or unable to do what we've been asked that won't be immediately obvious, even to other autists.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare you'll find an autist of any age who hasn't experienced a degree of unavoidable trauma in their lives, and the older we get, especially if we've remained unidentified, that trauma deepens as the same mistakes get repeated over and over again. There's a long list of reasons why we may hesitate or have difficulty cooperating. Stacked demands, or a list of instructions, may be problematic, even when they're written down. Do we do the tasks in the order they're given, or is there an unspoken priority? Will we get into trouble for picking the hardest one first so we take a long time to get round to the other jobs, or do the easiest task first and risk being called lazy? Just trying to work it out is a mental minefield where a single wrong step could spell disaster. Rejection sensitivity might lead someone to be demand avoidant. Their anxiety at being told their efforts aren't up to snuff can be enough to freeze someone who's rejection sensitive in their tracks as they hurriedly try to work out which will be the least traumatic course of action. If they don't comply, they'll likely suffer some form of consequence. But will it be worse than being bawled out for doing the task badly? PTSD is far more common in autistic people than most people realise, and it can also have a huge impact on how we...
It's often been said that if you're autistic, you have PTSD or CPTSD. I don't really know any autistic people that I think... I can't think of any autistic people that I know of that don't have PTSD.
...react to certain requests, maybe even all requests. And of course there's executive function to consider. Most autists will, at least at some point in their lives, encounter difficulties with motivating ourselves to do basic tasks, even self-care. If we find it difficult even to muster up the will to look after our own essential needs, how easy do you think it is to follow additional demands from others? Mental health problems like depression and anxiety are so widespread amongst neurodivergent people, there's been debate about including them as diagnostic indicators. And it doesn't take a genius to know how they can impact on our ability to function at all, let alone do specific tasks. OCD can force someone to perform tasks using a specific, meticulous method or a predefined order which may not match your expectations, and lead you to think they're missing the point or not cooperating. Common neurodivergences like dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and numerous unseen medical problems can impact on our ability to complete a task. Then there's alexithymia, which, as you know, if you follow this channel, is a characteristic around half of autists share. That delay in...
That's a statistic I have not heard yet, that half of us have alexithymia. I am not going to refute that one bit whatsoever. Now, the reason I'm stopping to talk about alexithymia, my son was 21 and 22, excuse me, and he took his life last October, partially from having alexithymia. So it's something that is very important to be aware of and to do everything we can to combat.
Response that someone takes as a rejection of their demand may simply be us working out how we feel about the requests you made. And even if we're not alexithymic, what about simple processing time? It's not exactly unusual for us to take much longer than expected just to reconcile all the mixed messages encoded into verbal and non-verbal communication to even know what's being asked of us. The problem with the current debate around PDA is that it's based on a false premise. It would be ridiculous to say that a pathological need to avoid demands can't or doesn't exist. Name any behaviour or activity, even those which aren't seen as in any way harmful or problematic, and there will be people who feel an innate compulsion to do it, even against their own interests. Every addict is battling with a pathological need of some variety. Every phobia is an irrational fear, and PDA is a real thing without doubt. But how common is it? Following my own conversations with people whose lives have been blighted with the PDA label, I have my doubts that it's anywhere near as common as its proponents think, and even less confidence that it's worthy of inclusion in any diagnostic procedure. I have no personal objection to research into pathological demand avoidance whatsoever, but I can't support it in its current state. Before we jump to the conclusion that someone has a compelling pathological need to refuse cooperation, we have to eliminate all the possibilities mentioned earlier.
Right, and the thing is there's such a big difference between simply refusing to do it or not wanting to do it, and of course being PDA. PDA is you may want to do it, you may really want to do it, but it ain't gonna happen. So.
And plenty of others that I couldn't fit into a half-hour YouTube video. Are they demand avoidant? Or are they asking questions the other party doesn't want to answer, can't answer, or can't be bothered to answer? Are both parties understanding the instruction in the same way, and all objectives made clear? Does the request clash with specific sensory differences, moral understandings, or could it do unintentional harm? PDA is just too convenient a rug to brush genuine concerns and trauma under. It allows real problems to be ignored and absolves the perpetrators of responsibility because they no longer have to face the consequences of their actions. Their inappropriate behaviour, poor communication or intolerance ceases to be the issue with the convenient peg of pathological demand avoidance to hang their woes on. So why should they stop? To regard someone as pathologically demand avoidant without first eliminating every other possibility or cause is neither morally justifiable nor scientifically wise. When you have difficulties in communicating with them too, you risk dipping your toes into the inhuman. In years gone by, we saw talk amongst the noblest of academics of personality traits having a male or female bias, so they could promote autism as a brand of hypermasculinity.
He's talking about Simon Baron-Cohen, the one person who shouldn't be saying anything about autism whatsoever.
The extreme male brain. Then, wondering for years why so few...
And that was debunked, by the way. Basically, everything Simon Baron-Cohen said has pretty much been debunked.
Girls and women were being diagnosed. They told us we lacked empathy, claimed by them as the essence of what it means to be human, then stood back whilst their irresponsible speculation was twisted into a template of cold, ruthless villainy to suit the needs of all who would use it to their advantage.
You still talking about Simon
From the
Baron-Cohen.
crooked boss to the resentful partner, right up to the prosecutor in the criminal court. Now we have PDA, pathological demand avoidance, and the dangers are plain to see. So why isn't any attention being paid? The moment you put the idea of PDA into the hands of the wrong people, and believe me, wherever there's self-preservation or money, position, lust, personal favour, even just popularity at stake, an awful lot of people become the wrong people. When they get hold of PDA, you are opening up an already vulnerable and marginalised group to a whole new arena of abuse beyond any we've known before. When you allow our doubts, our concerns, even our nightmares to be dismissed as a symptom of a medical condition to be cured, you take away our right to say no. You rob us of our agency and of our dignity. If we can't say no, we can't protect ourselves. In an age of increasing misogyny, how will a female autist ever feel safe when a predatory...
This is very interesting because it seems like he's talking about doctors who are resisting or abusing this term pathological demand avoidance, which would be, of course, only really be taking place in
male
the
can
UK.
dismiss their protests as demand avoidance in the full knowledge that there's a bevy of autism experts willing to back them up in court. We're robbed of the ability to agree or disagree, consent or decline, trust or be trusted. The right to say no is the most fundamental of all human rights, for without no, we have nothing. PDA is a buzzword seeking a home. A neat concept looking for enough traction to finance a few lucrative research careers. And it's easy to see why it's been shoveled into the ever-deepening pit of possible symptoms of autism, because it dovetails nicely with the existing tranche of inaccurate and misleading interpretations of autistic minds. If we really were the insensitive, empathy-free, big-picture missing and emotionally dead creatures we're painted to be, it would slot in place neatly. But that's not who we are.
But the thing is we wouldn't be PDA, and we wouldn't be responding in the ways that we do to it if we had no emotions. So the fact that we are PDA, it does show to an extent that we, of course, that we do have emotions.
We are thinking, feeling human beings, trying our best to fit into a world that doesn't accommodate us. Every day of our lives, we're fighting against misunderstandings, harmful assumptions, and the insidious influence of prestigious yet ill-informed experts making our daily lives ever harder with their latest theory du jour. We really don't need another. Thank you for watching.
Alrighty, there's just one more, and
this video has been on the cards for a long...
He's
Here are 5 reasons we stopped buying our meat from the grocery store and started getting...
Autismatic is basically got another video on this where he's kind of finishing this up.
And show how it doesn't bear up to scrutiny when other interpretations are allowed into the mix. How things that might look like demand avoidance are often something else, including a lot of behaviours that are common in autistic people. Things like asking questions and wanting to set clear, unambiguous boundaries and goals. Behaviours like these usually only delay us from acting on a demand and could be addressed with a little understanding and patience, but they can still lie at the root of misunderstandings that raise the avoidance flag. Then there's things that might actually prevent us from carrying out the demand. Moral quandaries, sensory issues, and the need to be meticulously accurate and truthful are typical autistic blockages. None of those are in any way pathological
That was something that my son really had a very difficult time. He did not want to do anything whatsoever unless he knew basically everything about it and knew that he could execute whatever task perfectly before he began. And so, because you can't always know all of those factors, and I'm very much the same way, um, it can become paralyzing in itself.
They're quite transparent and reflect genuine, relatable reasons to pause for thought. So we could describe these as rational demand avoidance. It's important I make the distinction, because whilst it's very common for the label to be misunderstood or applied inappropriately, the PDA phenomenon is quite real, even if it might not be what some people think.
Absolutely.
I've ummed and ahed a lot about how to do this follow-up video. I considered the diagnostic checklist approach. 10 signs you have PDA. Something more aligned with self-help. 5 ways to beat PDA and get things done. Or the sensationalist clickbaity version. You won't believe what PDA really is. But I think the best way is just to tell it from the heart.
Mm-hmm.
From my point of view, PDA isn't just one thing. A number of distinct factors that impact my life in different ways and can all be discussed separately when viewed together in a specific context constitute my PDA profile. This is my personal perspective. At the centre of my experience of PDA, at its deepest core, is a feeling. Numerous behaviours have been categorised as indicative of PDA by scientists engaged in endless debate and theory over what they might mean. But what lies behind all of those observations? Behind the communication barriers and the misunderstandings, the pleading and the tears, the begging, the joking, the platitudes, the dismissal, the fawning, the anger, the frustration and the meltdowns. What starts it all off in me is nothing more than a simple biochemical reaction.
Right.
An
It's
emotion.
neurological. It's neurological.
Feelings are complicated things. The English language alone contains thousands of words to describe the subtle nuances of emotion, all of which have derivative adjectives and adverbs and have been applied in hyperbole and aphorism for centuries. Even then, we still have to borrow words from other languages for the ones we missed, like schadenfreude and ennui.
I don't even know those words.
At any given time, our emotional soup is a thick, simmering broth of conflicting needs and contradictions. No single feeling exists in isolation, and even familiar emotions come in many flavours. Take pride. Pride in our own achievements feels quite distinct from the pride we feel for those of our children, or of our country, the county swimming team, or Simon in the office who just won Employee of the Month. Our feelings are the vanguard of our decision-making processes. Before our conscious minds have even processed incoming sensory data into a meaningful thought, our emotions are already at work, influencing our responses. It's rare we respond to complex situations on emotions alone, but when we do, we think of it as instinctive, a gut reaction. Now, this is the point in an in-person presentation where a chap leans back in his chair, clasps his hands across his chest and clears his throat. We all have to do things we don't want to, pal. If we all said no to things we don't like, then nothing would get done and we'd all starve. He's starting to get the point, but he's looking in the wrong direction. He's eyed the lay of the course and picked up that PDA starts with a feeling, but he staked his bet on the wrong emotional horse. He's envisioning a feeling based on the desirability or difficulty of a task, which, whilst it's a pretty commonplace conclusion, hence the previous video on this topic, is also overly simplistic and just a little bit judgmental. The feeling at the heart of PDA is rarely related to the desirability of the task at hand. In fact, in my case, it wouldn't even cross my mind.
Absolutely.
It could be the most laborious and unpleasant job you could think of, or something we've looked forward to and worked towards for years, and we could still face the same emotional dilemma.
Absolutely.
bubbling away in
And
PDA
we may have faced the same inability to do said task, no matter how many years we planned for it. Or, in fact, the more we want it, the more difficult it may become. In fact, the bigger the task, a lot of times, like I don't know, say we're finishing college or whatever else, and getting to that actual graduation, we might be able to do everything else, and then when it comes to the graduation part, we may not be able to do that.
Soup, a
because
cream
it's just
streaks
accumulated.
of self-preservation and self-esteem, swirling around chunks of social respect, social scoring, and social disconnection, seasoned with fear, spiced with failure, and simmered in a rich stock of anxiety in a cast iron pot marked obligation. Whether you experience PDA or not, you're likely no stranger to the feeling at the heart of it, or at least something very similar. Obligation is a necessary fact of life, and essential to the functioning of society. But how we respond to each individual commitment can be difficult to predict. The context of an obligation isn't just determined by its magnitude. The nature of the task, the people it obliges us to, our competence, confidence, and any reward or consequence all factor into our perception. Everybody responds to obligation differently, and with or without PDA, those responses are entirely framed by personal, momentary context. The context is unique not only to you, but to each individual obligation and moment in time. As a general rule, the more we feel obliged to do something, the less keen we are to do it. But even that's not a constant. Even the most pressing and binding of obligations seem less intimidating if we enjoy the task, we like the person we're doing it for, or we desire its rewards. Obligation does strange things to people too. The financial affairs of the filthy rich, for example, are a fascinating exploration of the lengths people will go to avoid obligation. Millions paid to charities, philanthropic foundations and high-profile social engineering projects which step on the toes of governments, or wasted on valuable works of art left to languish unappreciated in bank vaults, not just to save money, but to avoid the obligation of tax. They pay even more millions to lobby politicians who themselves hide fortunes in shell companies registered in tiny tropical islands they've never been to, whilst their wealthy spouses claim not to even live in the same country, all to avoid obligation. To cheat the very system they preside over. I have a PDA profile, and my fear of obligation, of dealing with social debt, can paralyse me. It can stop me dead in my tracks and prevent me from doing the most elementary of tasks. Before I started to understand it and moderate its impact on my life, PDA could escalate any situation into a mega confrontation in the blink of an eye. As a child, I was ill-equipped to process those feelings. My immature, alexithemic mind, unable to connect directly with traumatic emotion, could only process it in caveman terms. Demand, make pain. Stop demand, stop pain. All I could say with confidence back then is that sometimes obligation of any kind could trigger overwhelming anxiety and leave me feeling utterly suffocated by the pressure. I didn't know what it was about certain demands that triggered that compelling need to escape or evade. I just knew how difficult and painful it was to choke it down. I also learned very young that voicing my fears to others could lead to even worse consequences. I felt trapped, helpless, and alone in my struggles, with a phenomenon that was decades away from even having a name. It took me years to stitch all the details together, to painstakingly trace the paths of thought, sensation and memory to make sense of it. It was in my 30s that I stopped just fighting my PDA and started understanding it, because somebody came into my life who cared enough to help me build a safe space, free of PDA triggers, so I had room to gather my thoughts.
Good. Very good.
PDA
I'm very
makes
curious
me
about
feel
that story.
compelled, duty-bound almost, to anticipate everything, every possibility and contingency all the time. If someone has to ask me to do something, then it feels like I've already failed. And I've never stopped feeling that way. Despite the understanding I have now, the PDA feelings are still there, as vivid and as uncomfortable as they ever were. I'm just better equipped now. Think of it like paying bills. Every obligation is a bill that needs to be paid in social currency. The currency of obligation is more than just an exchange of labour. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours is just the start of it. It permeates all our relationships and the very fabric of our society. Obligation is more volatile than traditional economic commodities, though, and can go from blue chip stock to toxic asset in a flash. Warning, emotional investments may go up as well as down. The social capital of faith and trust markets can fluctuate, and any return on your investment is not guaranteed. Always invest your emotions wisely.
Looking to build a chatbot for your website? On Fiverr, you can find AI experts.
These ads just drive me nuts.
My PDA is a pressing need for all my social bills to be paid in advance, so nobody ever has to ask me for payment. I try to manage all my commitments in as proactive and hassle-free a way as possible, like the social equivalent of paying my utilities by direct debit. Instead of receiving bills in the form of requests, I want all my obligation bills sorted out before I know they're due. And I've no interest in credit of any sort either. No emotional loans, no entitlement hire purchase or credit cards of favour. The less I have to deal with social currency, the happier I am. If I ever have to ask you for a favour, which I'll avoid just as fervently, I'll hope that I've already had so much social credit stacked up that I've never cashed in. You'll be sure to be there for me when I need you. When somebody makes a request of me, or reminds me of something, nudges me, gives me a hint, or generally points me in the direction of a task, it feels like they've just pointed out an unpaid debt on those social accounts. And it triggers in me a response of fear, of shame, and of guilt. It's not that I don't recognise that the task needs doing, or even that I don't want to do it. It's the fact that I can no longer prevent you from asking that causes a disruption.
Mm-hmm.
The you scratch my back viewpoint may suggest that I've got it upside down. When you do something for someone, they're the one with the obligation to you, they'll tell me, and I have no argument with that. What they can't see is that I don't want anyone to feel obliged. All I want is a nice clean set of accounts where all my social bills are settled. I don't want anyone indebted to me any more than I want to be indebted to them, because it messes up my social accounting. It's not that I'm afraid of owing you a favour. The whole idea of anyone owing anybody anything puts me in a spin. When I was a kid, I'd use all sorts of tricks to try to eliminate the obligation. I'd beg and plead, distract and deviate, bargain and cajole. I'd follow people around, barraging them with verbal missiles, hoping they would withdraw inside their obligation bunkers and take their demands with them. Or I'd formulate complicated pseudo-scientific arguments, claim support from invisible allies, or quote the half-remembered, barely relevant musings of philosophers. When none of those worked, there was nothing left but to stomp and grumble, fawn and grovel, cry, sniff, snort, flail, and eventually shut down. Any onlooker would think I was a spoiled brat whining and wheedling their way out of a task they didn't want to do, because that's the obvious answer, isn't it? The Occam's razor solution. If it walks and talks like a spoiled, lazy, petulant monster of a child, it probably is.
Yes.
If anyone had listened to me, or maybe if I'd been better at telling them, they might have recognised that I was actually perfectly happy to do the task. Mm-hmm. The scene could have been avoided.
Mm-hmm.
Provided we had a time machine. An accurate one. So I could step into the time vortex and go back to a point in time shortly before you asked and get the job done then. So when I get back to this moment again, there'd be nothing for you to ask me to do, and my social accounts would be intact.
Then it'd be awesome.
Even the most resourceful of us can't keep up a spotless social balance sheet indefinitely. Keeping it squeaky clean requires anticipating everything, and that's just not possible. We have to learn to be easier on ourselves for not predicting the unpredictable, but they're not the worst demands. The ones that really hurt for me are the ones I know I should have done, but didn't. No matter how subtle your hint, how kind your words, how diplomatic your demeanour, If I feel like I should have known something needed doing before you asked me, your request is like a rubber stamp of failure coming down on my forehead with the force of a sledgehammer. I'm stood in the town square in my birthday suit while the whole town points at me and laughs. I'm on stage at the Albert Hall and I've forgotten my lines. My cousin's biker gang have just rolled up in the drive. The kangaroo that escaped from the zoo is tearing up the backyard. There's a squirrel in the Christmas tree and the vicar's due round for afternoon tea. Now! Forgetting things, or maybe more accurately, failing to get round to doing things I really should do, is something many autistic people are familiar with. Problems with executive functioning, a crossed wire in our task ignition system that can mean our get up and go spends most of its time got up and gone, can be a problem that aggravates or triggers PDA feelings. I'll talk about it in greater depth on another occasion, but for now, think of an executive functioning misfire as a steep hill that takes will, determination and a favourable wind to conquer, and stands in the way of us initiating any task. In general, tasks are graded on their difficulty, cost, time required and so on, but when our executive functioning withdraws its cooperation, a hill emerges from the depths to obscure the view. All we're registering is a hill with a task hidden behind it. When more and more tasks become hidden behind hills, the hills are all we can see. Instead of a small task, an achievable task and a complex task to choose from, there's just 3 equally tall executive function peaks to leg it over before we can even see them. Even regular, everyday tasks can feel unachievable, because every hill feels as daunting as the last. Our executive function can do a Lord Lucan any time it wants, and in relation to any or every task, depending on the conditions, including things we want to do or have to do, like get out of bed, comb our hair, or put our cereal into a bowl before we eat it. Sensory or motor difficulties can aggravate PDA feelings when they slow us down or impair our skills, or make environments harder to navigate or function in. ADHD can interrupt our concentration and make planning, routines and task management both hard to initiate and harder to maintain, shortening the fuse on the PDA time bomb. PDA feelings can come into play when the interoceptive differences many of us experience mean we're unaware of our need for essentials like eating, sleeping and basic self-care until it's too late. And even if we've registered the need, monotropism might see us so hyper-focused in a different direction that we forget our obligations to ourselves. Oh no, I just said it. Obligations to ourselves. Why didn't I have to say that? Haven't I learned?
Yes.
I called everyday tasks like eating and self-care obligations. Now, if they're obligations, that means forgetting them is just as much of a failure as being asked to do something. So I've messed up my balance sheet again. Now I owe myself a debt. So if I could travel back in time and prevent the obligation, I'd have no reason to travel back in time later. So I couldn't be there to prevent the debt. It's a paradox, isn't it? I've taught myself into both resisting my own needs by turning them into obligations and a temporal paradox. Well, people, stop asking me to do things. And that includes you. Me. As I said earlier, PDA starts with a feeling. For me, it's a pervasive fear of obligation on either side. In terms of social accounting, I'm in the neither a beggar nor borrower be camp. I don't want to owe you anything, nor for you to owe me. It doesn't mean I'll be unwilling to do anything that might put you in my social debt, because I don't intend to collect on it. I've no plans for a reckoning when I'll call in all those favours you never returned. If I get to the point where I feel taken advantage of, I'll most likely drift away from you or cut you off, not hold you to account. A few years ago, Tomlin Wilding proposed an alternative name for PDA, which conveniently retained the acronym, but in my opinion, offers a more representative, accurate picture of what it really is. They suggested pervasive drive for autonomy as an alternative, and I think it works pretty well. It certainly does a better job than the incumbent candidate. The compulsion to keep those social balance sheets clear, that need for choice over obligation and visceral fear of social debt, whoever might hold it, comes down to a need to decide my own future. Autonomy is that most human of motivators, the desire to determine our own fate. It's the will to be free. That's not to say that PDA isn't a complete pain in the butt, or that it's a rational, useful trait to live with. The feelings behind PDA are not completely rational, and don't think we don't know it. As children, we don't know that though, and learning to survive in a transactional world, despite an aversion to obligation, even to ourselves, isn't easy without good support and help. Our whole world is transactional, not just in terms of goods and services, but most of our relationships. We trade in social economies not just of labour, but of loyalty, goodwill and mutuality of purpose. Any hindrance to fully engaging with those economies is going to make life harder, and PDA certainly does that. All my life, I've battled with the urge to avoid tasks, not because I'm unwilling to do them, but because some irritating part of myself that doesn't quite connect with the same reality as my conscious mind, the PDA demon on my shoulder, keeps telling me that if I stall for long enough, they'll stop asking. Then forget they asked in the first place, leaving me free to do the task off my own back instead. And that's more important than any consequences of not doing it now. These days, when people order me, ask me or hint at me to do something, I've learned to handle it a lot better. It's always been easier to keep my PDA imp quiet when in the company of people I can rely on and who understand the distress the PDA feeling can cause me.
The only time that I have ever been able to keep this PDA to in check, so to speak, is kind of almost like situations like now where I am at home in a very sheltered environment almost 24 hours a day, but I still have PDA issues just with doing regular things like taking out trash or what have you. As soon as I get done here, I'm gonna I gotta it's trash night, so I gotta take out all the trash and everything. That's something I gotta do, which thankfully is going to be easy for me today, but it's just one of those little tiny demands.
They know they can not only spare me the indignity and cognitive dissonance of wrangling PDA feelings, they can save themselves the hassle of negotiating with me by being gentle in their requests and keeping conditions or deadlines which might aggravate my demand anxiety to a minimum. For my part, I've more or less silenced the demon on my shoulder when I'm around them by reassuring myself there's no evidence they're keeping social accounts of their own. If they're not keeping count, then there's no need for me to, so my PDA can rest for a while. Outside of those safety zones, there's been a lot of gritting of teeth and biting of tongues. I haven't always concealed my discomfort very well, and there's been plenty of nasty scenes because of it. I've shed tears, melted down, shut down, been manhandled and punched because of it, but I've survived it one way or another. I'd rather not have to battle with PDA feelings in the first place, because it is that, a battle. One that's made infinitely harder by the aggressively simplistic attitudes of employers, educators and even medical professionals who've recently picked up on it, not to mention by its bloody awful name. The PDA feeling made school a struggle from start to finish and employment a suffocating ordeal. If I manage to keep my accounts free of workplace obligations for any length of time by consistently staying ahead, my workload always increases soon after. No busybody manager could ever keep up with the effort I've put in to ensure my need for tidy social accounting doesn't lead to expectations beyond my ability, while simultaneously suppressing the urge to scream and run away to find someone who can build me a time machine. Great Scott! It's a combination of the PDA feeling and executive functioning troubles that makes completing many everyday tasks way more of a chore than they ever should be. And
yesterday, I said something, or day before, I said something to the effect of, with autism, what's it like to be autistic, or in this case, PDA? And basically what I said is, imagine that anything and everything you do is 10 times harder, but everyone is, because you're PDA or you're autistic, but everyone is blaming you for being autistic and demonizing you because of it. And with PDA, it feels very much like that kind of catch-22. No matter what, it's bad. There's really no good that can come out of it.
Caused far too many missed deadlines and broken promises. My autistic veracity, alexithymia, flat affect, and the double empathy
Trevor, is
problem
this sounding
have
better?
all mixed in with PDA feeling to start off a fair chunk of all the arguments, misunderstandings, and embarrassments that have served as hard life lessons for me. If there's an element
I'll go back to my
personal
headset, but I don't
PDA
want
passenger that could be thought of as pathological, something like a behavioural addiction, then it would not be an addiction to saying no, like I portrayed in the simplistic view I explored last time. It would be an addiction to keeping social accounts and finding myself lacking whenever I fail to anticipate a need or act on it in time because my executive functioning, ADHD, sensory anxiety, emotional dissonance, short-term memory glitches, monotropic focus, social anxiety, communication quirks, autistic attuned theory of mind, or some other quirk of my nature stopped me or slowed me down so much someone had to actually ask me to do something. That doesn't trip off the tongue quite so easily, though. In my efforts to erase my failures from history, the child I used to be caused way more pain than necessary, both to himself and the people he cared about, because he was terrified of being smothered by social and emotional debt. I haven't talked about where I think the PDA feeling might come from today, nor why it seems, at least so far, to be most noticeable in autistic people. I've also not gone into any detail about how I've learned to live with it beyond the benefit of having a safe space. That's for another video. This time, I've tried to give a very personal picture of why I consider PDA to have been a significant factor in the course of my life so far. If you experience PDA, your feelings and the traits they interact with won't be exactly the same as mine, but it's unlikely we'll be too far apart. Your PDA feeling might not involve guilt, failure and shame like mine does, but it will be no less unpleasant nor less of a mountain to climb. Maybe even more so. If you're the parent of a PDA kid, then my experiences won't map onto theirs neatly, but there will be pointers here that may help you move forward. Living with PDA is a lot easier when we have people in our lives who can relate to us without the perception of social accounts. When we have an oasis to return to, a space free of obligation, it allows us to catch our breath, ready for the next battle against PDA back in the outside world. I'm not sure I'd have got through the last 20 years or so if I hadn't met my wife. It's thanks to her that I now have a strong safety zone, a haven of calm and mutual support that allows me to recharge the hefty batteries I need to get through another day of dealing with the outside world through a fog of misunderstandings, communication failures, empathy dead zones, and of course, PDA. Without that buffer, I'd not have had the luxury of time to think, or the emotional support I needed to put together the notes and observations of a lifetime and identify the deep-rooted feelings buried beneath the sometimes overwhelming anxiety of my PDA. In my case, I came to realise that every time something makes me feel a sense of obligation, I feel like I've already failed. I know that I have to overcome those feelings to function in our transactional world, but if you know me and care to do so, you could also spare me some of the effort. The genesis of PDA, for me, was fear of failing the people I care about.
Absolutely. I bet that, in a sense, though, he says the genesis, the beginning of it. The beginning of it is neurological. It is really truly the beginning of it. But what he's talking about is the beginning of how it manifests.
Point where I can put that into meaningful words took decades of soul searching, study, learning from mistakes, experimentation, and a few too many catastrophes. I don't want the youngsters of today to have to go through that alone like I did. If someone in my life had looked beyond the easy interpretations and taken the time to help me work out why demands caused me so much distress before I learned the hard way, I might not have been burned and broken so many times. But back then, in the 70s and 80s, nobody knew to ask. But you do now. Thank you for watching.
Alrighty, that was Autismatic. Great channel here on YouTube. I am going to wrap it up. I don't know how all this stuff got here on this screen. It's not supposed to be there. But anyway, I'm going to jump on Discord here in a second, and I am going to sign off, and I am going to get out of here. I've been on here for, what's it say now? TikTok didn't kick me off, but we've been going 3 hours. And so I'm going to jump on Discord and chill out for a while if anybody wants to go there on the autistic page. This is David Page. Screw them. Flap harder.